There's been a few times in my life where I thought I was dead. My torso would be in the airplane, but my feet would still be out while we're in the air. and instead of going over the hump, I hit the far edge of it, and it just tore the gears off, tore the belly out, tore the prop off. So I'm basically a submarine just going through the trees. Fishing game, you don't hear this, okay?
Welcome to the Coffee and a Hanger podcast. My guest, Gary Heert, was a school teacher in Kotzebue, Alaska. On evenings and weekends, he spent every possible moment flying, hunting, and putting himself into dangerous situations. I can't think of a better example of a deeply Alaskan experience. Enjoy.
Every one of these pictures you see where airplanes are upside down or on the nose, those are not accidents, okay? Those are incidences. Big difference in the terminology of the FAA.
Yeah.
An incident is less than $500, no death. An accident is more than $500 and possible death. So, mine are all incidents. Even though it cost me $10,000, $15,000 to put it back, it's an incident, And
So I got a lot. So did you never turn those into the NTSB? You never told me.
Never.
And
that
did you
was
fly
kind of
them out. How many of them did you fly out?
I've flown every one of them out.
Let's just just to give me an overview, how many airplanes have you had an incident with?
1, 2 in Ambler, 1 on the ice, 1 on the lake, 2 at Mitchell's Ranch. So 7 probably incidents. A prop is not an incident.
Right, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Prop you take.
So where you bend some metal, you bent metal separate.
Yeah, when you bend something where it's not flyable. A prop is, you take the dang prop off, you hike out with it, you go. I always had an extra prop in my house, always. Might be a flat pitch prop, it might be a prop that I've dinged up and had rebuilt through prop overhaul in Anchorage or something, But you have to have an extra prop or you're going to be down for a month.
So you've done this a few times and you've always put it back together out there and flown it out. Okay, do you want to tell me some of those stories?
Okay, this story here, bud, this is Spittler's fault. Okay, I want you to know that, okay? Don Spittler was my hunting partner.
Okay.
And we got in more troubles than anything else on the ground. Okay. And if you'll notice, there is an auger there in the background. So I have a landing strip that I built up in Mitchell's Ranch, which happens to be where Billy Mitchell put in the telegraph line in 1922 all the way to Fairbanks. And there's an old ranch there. And lots of clear areas, but trails. And so I took one of these trails and widened it out. About 400 feet up the runway is a dip, and it always gets water because it's wet.
Yeah.
So I was coming out with a load of moose, and so I had my partner, I says, I can get another 100 feet, 150 feet up above this dip full of water. Mm-hmm. And so I taxied around it through the brush, and I got up there and turned the airplane around. I told Spittler, I said, Spittler, go down and stand on that hole. And you stand on that hole, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the power to this sucker. And, Maul's got good power and takeoff. Yeah. And when I get to that hole, I'm going to pop flaps. And when you pop flaps, you can actually jump 10 feet in the air if you want, if you got enough speed. If you got, let's just say you got 20 miles an hour, you can probably pop over the hole. And that's about what I figured I was going to get, about 20 miles an hour.
Yeah, so you're just going to kind of pop over and keep going.
Yeah, you've probably done it a few times. You get over a log or something, on a close sandbar. So if Spittler, he goes down there and he's ready, and it's tundra. It's not, and I'm on 950s. I never had anything over 950 wheels. So I get, okay, he's standing down there, and I can see him. He's about 150 feet in front of me, and I figured, okay, he's on the hole. So I poured the power to it. Then that airplane's going, boom, boom, bam, bada boom. It's pretty rough. It's not necessarily this pavement. And I get there, and I see Spittler right outside of my vision. And so I pulled the flaps and I hit the edge. Instead of going over the hump, I hit the far edge of it, and it just tore the gears off, tore the belly out, tore the prop off, and it's a variable pitch prop. It was a pretty expensive prop. And
so he wasn't standing.
He was standing 25 feet to the side of it. So when I popped right into the other edge of it, and then I'm going out through the trees. And then everybody, and I didn't turn over. That was because it wiped
is
the
crazy.
gears right out. So I'm basically a submarine just going through the trees. And it stops, and I'm off with the magnetos, and I'm off with the gas lines, and because I didn't want to burn up. I come out of that airplane, and I'm not a happy man. And Speller's coming down. And he's my partner, and I loved him and everything else, but he knew he was in trouble right then. Hey. So, we're out there, and I'm 70 miles from nowhere. And so we looked at the thing and said, well, God dang, we got to do something. So we built a tripod, a big tripod, had it come along with us, and took the top of the cowling off, put that coming there. There's a center of gravity hook on most airplanes. It'll just lift the whole airplane up. Got on a hook, and we lifted that airplane up off the ground a good 2 feet so I could inspect on it. Well, of course, the mufflers are torn off and the cowling is torn. There's a lot of damage. I had to replace the whole bottom of the cowling. And I had to replace the front of the cowling. I had to replace the prop. I had to replace the gears.
Yeah.
And it's 250 miles to Fairbanks, and that's where I'm going to have to get parts.
Yeah.
So I have to go 70 miles out to the road, 50 miles down the road, Taylor Highway,
Yeah.
to Tok, 210 miles to Fairbanks. I found a set of parts out of Harding Lake. I found a set of gears,
Yeah.
borrowed, and I went to prop overhaul, and I took mine in. Got that, and we went back in with the Argo, and we had this thing lifted up on a tripod, and luckily, when the gears sheared off, the gears had been worked on before. So the welds where the gears, they didn't rip them out of the fuselage, didn't rip the nipples out of the fuselage. The brackets were still there, just like you're playing.
Yeah.
The gears are gone, but
That's crazy.
the pins are still there. So I was able to lift that up,
That's
put
crazy.
new gears under it, put it together, and so that took care of my gears. I got new gears on now. I have this prop. That prop probably weighs, it weighs a good 150 pounds, 100 pounds at least, because it's got a pretty big hub on it, which has got an oil reservoir in it.
Yeah.
And I had to make sure that I had that plugged in and everything. And I got it back on and got the airplane on its own wheels. Cowling was pretty well bent up. I bent it out with an axe and, got it to where it was going to fit and then taped together. So it wasn't going to fly off, I hope. And I set it there in the middle on front of that hole and tracked it, started up and tracked it, and it tracked pretty good. The prop, was tracking real well. So I said, geez, I might be able to fly this thing. So I checked the oil, and the oil was down, so we didn't have any aviation oil, but we had Argo oil, regular old motor oil. I said, hell, motor oil is better than no oil. I said, fill it up, and started it up, and oil poured out of the cowling, out of the back cowling. I said, oh, geez, what's going on? Shut it down. Where the starter on a Franklin 145, the starter is impaled on the back of the engine. I don't know where they are on a Lycoming, probably on the back somewhere too. So when I impacted the ground, that starter cracked all the way out to the top. I said, oh man, how in the hell am I going to get out of here now?
Yeah.
So I put all the oil. I said, well, it's a 45-minute flight to Tok. I says, well, pour every bit of oil we got in the thing. I overfill it. I don't care, because it's not going to last. It's going to blow out that crack because it's blowing out on the ground. We put a couple, 3 quarts of oil in it that we had. And I was able to take off, and, without a load, without meat and anything, I was able to get off 450 feet. And I flew out to the highway, which was 25 miles.
Yeah.
And then once I got to the Taylor Highway, I said, made it, because Taylor Highway is my landing strip all the way down to Tok, and I'm gonna be able to crash land somewhere. And so I got Taylor Highway. I'm going down Taylor Highway, and and the wind's blowing, and as I'm coming in to my Bayless and Roberts landing strip in Tok at that time. Tok did not have an airstrip like it does now.
Okay.
So we had a little grass strip there. As I'm coming in for our landing, it seized up. I'm out of oil. Of course, pressure's going down all the time. And I landed, A couple guys in Delta took that plane and took that engine up and rebuilt it. I had 14 brakes in the crank, and the flange was 40% broken all the way around the flange of the prop, where it hooked, where that new prop hooked on it.
Do you think that was that way before you took off?
Oh yeah,
didn't happen
I
because
cracked
of-
the flange and everything on landing. Usually when you get a prop, you got to be real careful. It's not the prop that's the problem; it's the crankshaft.
Yeah.
Because usually you're going to twist it, turn it, crack it somewhere.
Well, I mean, that's what they have. They have regulations that.
Right. Yeah. And nowadays, but you know what? Who's out in the wood with you for regulations? I figured, as long as it tracked well,
Yeah.
I figured I could fly, and it was tracking pretty good. Well, yeah, it tracked 45 minutes worth. No, I landed in 45 minutes. It tracked 44 minutes worth.
Yeah.
Because when I landed, I didn't have any power. And those guys
Crazy,
took that thing. It cost me a
crazy.
new engine. And so I can't afford an engine back in those days. It was $15,000 for a new engine. It was $8,000 for a rebuild. Yeah, I'm a school teacher. I'm a school teacher, by the way, not a pilot. And I found a Skymaster in Oshkosh, Kansas, and the Skymaster has two 140 Franklin engines on it. So I bought it for $2,000, I think, and I then had it shipped up. And when they shipped it up, they got as far as Tetland Junction, which is 12 miles from Tok. I called a couple of weeks later. I called God and said, "Where's my engine? Where's my engine?" "Oh, we delivered that 2 weeks ago." I said, "What?" So I drive down the road to Tetland Junction, and there's my engine sitting on a pallet on the side of the road on two tires. They had delivered it to that spot because it's supposed to be picked up by another truck, and my engine was sitting there on the side of the road.
Wow.
And I put it in and ended up flying that thing for another 8-9 years. In fact,
And what year did all this take place?
that was 1983 that
83.
I did that. Yeah, I flew it probably until 95, and then I ended up having a Tailorcraft, and I sold that in Fairbanks, and then I ended up having a Citabria. That was my last plane. I was a poor man's pilot by that time,
So let's go back a little bit, because the story you just told me, it kind of has the airs of the Wild West. Like you're out there doing this crazy stuff. There's no FAA around or whatever. That's 83. Okay. But I think that's kind of Alaska. We just sort of were behind everywhere else as far as,
Now, wait a minute.
regulation and development.
For FAA, these are all truisms.
There's something called, what do they call it?
Bullshit.
No. No, the
Truisms.
the statute of limitations. Come
Oh.
on. You don't have anything to worry about. Okay,
Hey.
but anyway, so you came up here with your parents when you were just like really young, right?
Oh, yeah.
Why did they come to Alaska?
Dad and Harold hunted deer in northern Michigan.
And who's Harold?
Harold is his hunting partner at that time. They wanted to hunt deer in Ketchikan. Well, how do you get there? They don't know. So in 48, the road had just opened up to the public. It was open in 46, closed in 47. 48, they opened it to the public.
The original road, you're talking about the Alcan
The Alcan Highway.
And that was because of the war? That was built
Yeah.
because of the war?
Right.
Okay.
Right. But the war's basically over
Yeah.
now, so they improved it enough to let people on it.
So how
they
long
got-
did that trip take?
Oh,
Do you think?
probably a couple months.
Yeah.
We camped along the way lots, and we got to Haines, where Haines Junction is. Well, there was no Haines cutoff at that time. The old Dalton Trail went down through there, and they had access to make a road out of it. Yeah, and I've got a picture of us going, and it goes down. You lose 8,000 feet in 5 miles. I mean, it's steep. So when we were there, I can remember Mom had to get out of the truck and walk ahead of the truck with a flashlight, so Dad could see the road with the flashlight because it was so foggy. We had to drop down 3,000-4,000 feet before you got below the fog, and you got down into, probably 60 miles, 70 mile on the Haines cutoff at that time.
And it's muddy and
It's
oh,
muddy
man,
and it's
gosh,
wet.
and you got the kids in there.
Yeah, and I'm 6 years old, 5 years old. I thought it was kind of neat, Hey, when you're 6 years old, everything's an adventure. And we got to Haines, and this is August now. The transportation to go to Ketchikan from them was an old LSD landing barge. That's all. It wasn't a ferry system.
What is an LSD landing
Well,
barge?
the front end drops down, and the troops run out the front end and shoot everybody. Well,
Okay.
that's what it was. And somebody had made a ferry system for the south. Well, it was frozen into the beach. So, here it is. We can't go any farther than the Haines. It's frozen in the beach. Winter's coming along. Dad parked the truck. We lived in that for a month or so. And then we end up, our first house was one of the officers' quarters at Fort Seward. It's called Port Chukut now, but it was Fort Seward. They closed it up in 1939. It was a fort there. And we lived in that thing the first year. The second year we were there, Dad started building a house outside of Haines.
So you guys just stayed there, basically.
And we stayed there for the next 27 years.
Okay, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the thing I can't get past my out of my mind on this. You say they wanted to hunt deer.
Yeah.
There had to also be something they were going away from.
I don't think they were in financial trouble. Dad had a good tool and die job. He was a craftsman at the factory.
So it may very well have just been adventure. So any other little stories you want to tell from your childhood that would be interesting?
Well, in Haines, we lived 5 miles outside of Port Chukut. The airport was 4 miles the other side of Haines. I'd run up that beach, what's that, 8, 9 miles, go out to the airport, hang around, because I kind of liked flying. I'm in high school now, and they wouldn't let me fly with them, but they'd let me, wash the airplanes and get the mud off and do the grunt work and stuff. So I always wanted to fly, but I could never afford it until I finally got my first job,
So what was your first job?
My first job, real paying job, was teaching in Kotzebue. And,
how did that happen?
well, Dad and Cliff knew I was getting tired of going to college. And my wife was down in Arizona State finishing her degree at that time. That's where she was from, was Arizona.
How did you meet her?
I went to Arizona State.
So
my mom, our boys were going to go to college. I don't care what happened.
Got it.
And so all of us graduated from Arizona State.
Wow.
And I went down there and met her at a church function, and I just, that's the girl right there.
Yeah.
And then 5 years later, it ended up being that girl.
Wow.
But I had left. But in the meantime, I went to 5 different colleges. I wanted to play ball. Because, in the Southeast, basketball was the sport.
So basketball is like huge.
Oh, the thing. Where's those pictures, Dutch? Got a Grumman Goose. That was our transportation. And I'd haul 8 people. If you weren't one of the best 7 people on your team, you didn't go. And needless to say, I was not going to be number 8. Here it is. There's their gooses coming off. There's a couple pictures there.
And who ran this goose?
Well, Alaska Airlines was the first one, but then Ellis Airlines, they became Ellis Alaska Airlines, and Bob Ellis was the pilot. And there was a series of gooses. Because you went to Petersburg, there's no landing strip. There's no airport there. You land in the water and you got on the dock, the boat dock. Go to Ketchikan, there's no airport. So you land in the water, you get on the dock. You go to Sitka, you land in the water. Sitka's Mount Edgecombe was a PBY terminal in those days. So they did have a ramp.
What's a PBY terminal?
PBY is a 22-place amphibious airplanes.
Oh, okay.
They did a lot of the surveillance work on the war efforts, and but they would carry 22 people. And
This
when
is
you took
July
off, you
61.
fought to sit in the bubble in the back, because when they took off, the bubble would go underwater. I mean, the water would spray up on the side of the airplane. Pretty soon it'd come up, and you're above the water looking like this. We always thought that was the greatest thing in the world.
Wow.
The gooses all took off. Somebody had to wear a pair of hip boots, because you land on the beach. So they had to carry everybody out to the airplane. Most of our beaches weren't hard enough to drive up on. So,
Yeah.
and then
So someone would land and kind of get a...
they'd land, and somebody'd hold the wing, and then carry the people out and put them in the airplane just, as fast as you could, and get the heck out of there.
Okay, so you're trying to play basketball and you're going to all these different...
I'm 9'6", buddy. I wanted to play ball. That's the only reason I went to college, really.
Were you good enough to get a scholarship or anything?
No.
At 5'8"?
No, I didn't get a scholarship there. I did get a scholarship at the University of Alaska. We called it the Juice Scholarship, because if you were on the team, when you went through the cafeteria line, you got 2 glasses of juice instead of 1. And that's all our juice scholarship. So, no, you didn't get scholarships. No, you went to have fun, play ball, have a good time. And, that's basically what happened on the thing. I had too many good times. Anyway, we were talking about how I got my first job. So I'd work in the summertime. One summer I made like $5,200 in 1962. That was a lot of money.
Right.
I went and bought a little sports car and wrecked it and everything else. But, money doesn't last.
Perfect.
Yeah. About a week later, I get this call and want to know if I wanted a job in Kotzebue. Well, I was raised in Haines. I had no idea where Kotzebue was. None. Interior of Alaska was a whole different country, And so I had to look up and met, and then sure enough, it's up in the Arctic. I said, yeah, we're going. And so I called my wife in Arizona. Well, they convinced me to hire on from Arizona, because in those days they had a policy every 2 years they'd send you to your home state. And so every 2 years they sent us out free and every year they paid for my education. I had to go on an improvement program because I was not a certified teacher.
And didn't you tell me before that your wife actually was a certified teacher?
She got it that summer, yeah. That's how I got a job. And she's still here, by the way, and I still keep her around.
Really?
Oh, yeah, she got a good retirement.
Wow.
So
we should have brought her in here.
Yeah, she's a wonderful woman. That's for the camera. And I don't want that cut out.
I'm sure
Okay?
she really is.
Yeah, don't cut that out. I want that sent to my beautiful, good-looking bride.
Okay.
60 years ago.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so
That's crazy. Okay, so you guys went to Kotzebue.
First year in Kotzebue, I didn't have an airplane.
Yeah.
And we're saving. I made $6,000 a year. My wife made $6,500. She made more than me because she was certified.
Right.
But out of that $6,000, your food was delivered to you once a year. You had one time a year to get food into the teacher's order. You had to get the standard food order. You'd get a case of Worcester sauce. You'd get a tub of lard with the mixture for butter to put inside of it. You'd get 50-gallon sacks of flour, and you had to sift it before you could use it to get the weevils out of it. And, so once a year, you got food.
And were they sending you the food, or was that?
It came in on a barge.
So you ordered it. You paid for it, though.
Oh, yeah, it came out of your wages.
Got it.
And your rent came out of your wages. I made $500 a month.
Yeah.
$300 was taken out, but $200 a month. I usually thrown it at the universities to pay my way to go play ball,
Yeah.
Now I got $200 a month for myself. That's big money. So we saved enough, and that first year, I went out to summer school because I had to go to summer school. That was a stipulation of the job. But I went out to Arizona State and went to summer school. And in those days, ground school was not a accredited program. That wasn't even in the universities. So I had to travel 15 miles over to Mesa, to Falcon Field, every evening, go to ground school. And I got my ground school done. I got my flying done. And in 30 days, I got my 50 hours in. I went over to Sky Harbor, found this super cruiser, a PA-12, and 135, no flaps, but it was an airplane. And I took off with 51 hours under my belt to Alaska.
Nice.
Needless to say, even though you think you know everything, you don't know crap.
Yeah.
And to this day, what is that? 1960, was that 50 years ago?
Quick question: is that you? So you got your private pilot? Did you get any other ratings ever? Or you? Okay, so you.
I never wanted commercial ratings or instruments or anything else. I wanted to fly just for me.
Yeah.
I would take people with me and stuff, but
I understand.
I'm really flying.
That's how I am.
For me. Yeah.
I want to do it. I want to be good at it, but I don't really want to do it.
That first year. That's another story. Okay, the first year I was in Kotzebue, I didn't own a plane. But I convinced this one guy to take me up the Kobuk 100 miles to go hunting because I wanted to go. And
Right.
Eskimos won't take you out when you're a Chichako, and I was kind of even though I was raised in Alaska, I was a Chichaco.
Yep.
So, well, I get upriver 200 miles, and I'm hunting out of the Hunt River in the area up and around Ambler, about 20 miles south of Ambler, and it's time for me to get back to work. I got to go to work Monday. So I said, okay, Lorenzo, we got to start back. He said, well, didn't I tell you? He had a big, long boat, looked like as long as this hangar, and he had to fill 50-gallon drums of gas. He said, didn't I tell you I'm not going back till the spring? I'm 200 miles up the Kobuk.
Hey guys, we'll get right back to the interview, but first, let's talk about the easiest way that you can support us in making more content like this. One of the most overlooked weight savings you can do on your aircraft is seat upholstery. In addition to losing an average of 5 pounds and as much as 45 pounds in extreme cases, redoing your seat upholstery will make you more comfortable while you're flying, add value and curb appeal, and can even have added safety margins. We'll talk about the safety features in another video, but for now, let's focus on weight savings. Some old aircraft were built when the upholstery and foam technology was, well, still using horsehair for cushion material. Not to mention that a lot of seats have several layers of upholstery stacked on top of each other. All this can add up to significant weight savings. This customer saved 8 pounds on just his Cessna 170 pilot and co-pilot seats. This customer saved 11 pounds on his Super Cub seats.
We just put these seats in Jack's Cub. We saved, what did we save?
11 pounds.
11 pounds.
Scotia over 11 pounds.
That's pretty awesome.
And this customer saved nearly 20 pounds just on his 180 bench seat. Click the link in the video description or go to sportaircraftseats.com to find out more.
I'm 200 miles up the Kobuk. He's you just go out and sit on a sandbar and, just sit there. Somebody will pick you up here soon, within a week. I just, okay. So he drops me off a sandbar in the middle of the Kobuk River. I sit there for half a day or something. Finally, a boat comes by. And he says, there's a guy up at Ambler who has a plane. It might take you back to Kotzebue. That's 200 miles.
Yeah.
And so I sit there and I got to Ambler and I walked up to this cabin and it was Harold Lee, who ended up being my hunting partner for the next 4 years in Kotzebue. And I said, I need it. So he got me back home. Well, we flew together that year. And I tell you, Harold had a cruiser with I'm going to say it was 1.8, but it was a 115 I think he had in it, like homing. Wasn't really overpowered, no flaps. But, we went everywhere with that thing. And you get an overflow. Well, I was the guy that had to go out and get an overflow to my knees, push this wing, run around, push this wing, move around, push this. Finally, he'd get enough speed up, and he's getting it going. And get in, Liebert, get in. I have to run around this airplane, go and grab the strut, jump in. Sometimes my torso would be in the airplane, but my feet would still be out. Well, we're in the air. and Harold, he'd laugh like mad, And we go into strips, and Harold says, go put a little tree up there about 500 feet and just stick that tree. If we don't get off by then, we're cutting it down. And we'd get off, and we'd be in the air and look down there, that damn tree would be in the gears.
Yeah.
And so I'd have to open the door and get down there and take that tree out of the gears. And we got in a few problems like that. I don't think we ever wrecked his cruiser though. Mm-hmm. I had now that's the first year, and I flew with Harold.
Hang on a second, just a second, because this.
Okay.
The picture of you guys flying around and you're kind of like pulling trees out of the gear or pushing them and stuff. And you said there was some things that happened. You got to tell me what you mean.
In those days, you could wolf hunt.
Yeah.
From an airplane.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of wolf hunting. We didn't get many, but we got a few wolves. We'd have to land and put them in there. I brought one wolf home to Kotzebue. Then they thought I shot my dog because it looked just like my dog, the back step. Another one up at Shunneck. Shunnek's kind of flat area, tundra.
Yeah.
And what the heck? A wolverine got caught in a trap, so he's running across the tundra. And so we got one here, and boom, bam, and we wounded him, and we landed. Well, he's not dead.
Yeah.
So we're landing, we're taxiing around and chasing chasing this dumb Wolverine around. Finally jumped out and shot him, But, we usually got home. We've got in whiteout conditions a few times and had to land on the sandbar and stay overnight. We always had a sleeping bag. Stay overnight. I can remember one time we had HF radios. So you had Ron Hayes on here, and he's talking about the HF radios and how they used to. That was we had. We call them coffee grinders, but they had a Omni beacon on them, and they had a few channels on them. But they're no good in Kotzebue. You get 5 miles out of Kotzebue, you got a mountain in your way, or not 5 miles, 20 miles, and so you can't communicate with a regular radio. So we'd have these HF radios, and when we'd have to stand on the sandbar, we'd take they have a trailing antenna that usually goes out there about 20, 30 feet, gives you a long transporting tube.
Yeah, because
so
they
they
wind it out.
Tree,
Okay.
Sit in a tree on the sandbar. I remember one time we closed our flight plan through True Greenland because the HF radio skipped over the hemisphere. It hit here, and then the next one would be maybe New York. The next time it hit would be Greenland. And so we closed flight plans through True Greenland. They of course they get on the radio and they call the FAA and Kotzebue and say, "Hey, 69 Alabama just called and says they're live."
Great. That is so crazy.
And our wives then would be happy, and I'm sure they had some anxiety points once in a while.
So
we'd sometimes come into Kotzebue, and Kotzebue was known for wind and whiteout. And it'd be whiteout coming across Kobuk Lake, which is 30 miles. And we would fly, basically try to keep level until you come across the lake and you'd hit, there's about, 75, 50-foot bluff all along that 50 miles or 30 miles where Kotzebue sits on this peninsula. And we'd fly until, boop, there's a bush. Boom, and you'd just go and fly that bush line down into Kotzebue. It might be 20 miles, bush to bush to bush, because everything's white at that time. So we didn't like doing that, but we had to do it sometimes.
So the first year with Harold flying, you're in the back seat.
Oh.
And how much time did he have? Was he a good pilot?
Harold has been there for 100 years, and he was
a lot older than you?
Not a lot, but I'm going to say he was 10 years old. Oh, he was more than that. He probably 20 years more older than I was, yeah. Maybe even more, but he was older, yeah.
Yeah.
When we flew later on, school was out at 3 o'clock. At 3:03, Bill, Rimmer, and I and Harold, we're in the air. We're going flying somewhere. We don't care. Just we're somewhere.
Wow.
And we did headquarters in Ambler, and then we go to the Redstone and up in the Cutler and over in the Nose. I mean, everywhere down in there. We just go chase bears. That was kind of fun. But, go find a grizzly bear. And again, FAA didn't hear this, but we'd come over and find a bear and chase them until they roll over, and they'd get up and claw at that plane. And we always thought, boy, I'd hate to be a berry picker on the other side of this hill, because that bear's coming over. He's not going to be happy.
He's destroying anything in his path.
And we'd chase bears and we'd chase wolves.
Or hate to lose an engine. That's what I always think when I've ever pissed off a bear. It's like, man, I hope my engine doesn't.
Well, you've never pissed off a bear?
Oh, I pissed it off unintentionally.
Oh, yeah.
It's like they get so mad. Like, if you're flying down the beach or something, you see a mother and her cubs, she's instantly pissed.
Oh, yeah.
And they get up and like this, and you're like, I hope I'm high enough,
We get so low, I was worried about him getting my gears. And that bear would get up in a slot, and he'd go poop, 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 poop. And, we did that dozens of times.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of the fun sport. And then Bill and I both sang. We loved to get up in the air and just, and we'd fly the airplane. We'd, and just fly around and be nuts,
Yeah.
We got nuts. He didn't make it, though. Okay. Poor old Bill didn't make it. Yeah. So anyway, where are we?
Well, you were saying the first year, and then I interrupted you and asked you to tell me more about the first year. But you were saying the first year, and then you were going to.
Then I went out and I got a pilot's license.
Yeah.
30 days. I wasn't going to waste time. Again, it wasn't university certified. They didn't have those programs in the 60s. I took off for Alaska the next day. I had 51 hours. I got to Seligman, Arizona, got into a thunderstorm, scared the crap out of me. There's no airport there, but there's a railroad, and next to the railroad they had a blank area where they stored ties. I landed there, walked into town, spent the night, got back in, went to Salt Lake, went to Butte, Montana, up the highway and got to the Northway. And it's bad weather, and the Canadian side of the Northway is flat. Then there's a roll of hills, and then you get to the Northway, it's flat. But I couldn't get over those hills because I was following the road. The road goes up into the clouds, and I ain't following that. So I couldn't follow it. So I had to go back, and I'd never landed on the road. I only had like 60 hours by this time. And that road looks about that narrow when you're first starting. Today, it's a beautiful runway. But back when you got 60 hours, it looks like that narrow. And I had to land there. And I landed there, and the guy's name was Buck. Invited me up for coffee. I'm 22 years old, 25 years old. Oh, yeah, coffee. I'm impressed with this old geezer, And then I was able to fly across, it cleared up enough in mid-afternoon, fly across to the Northway, and went into Anchorage. I can go in there too many times. Too many radios. I'm not a radio man. In fact, later on, every plane I built, I didn't even put radios in them.
Too heavy. Yeah. Of course.
And batteries, a lot of times we didn't put batteries. I love to have a battery.
Did you have no electrical system in
I had an electric system, but a lot of times they didn't have a battery. Batteries cost money, and when they went bad, you had to buy another one. So,
did you have a starter in that 12?
I don't know, but I prop started a lot of airplanes, and I know my 12, I prop started that many times. I did a lot of hand prop. I got another story on a hand prop. Okay, we can regress for 20 years?
Sure.
Okay. I got this old cruiser from a buddy of mine in Kotzebue who turned it upside down in the river, and so I had it. It was ratty, and I had to hand prop it all the time. So I'm on the runway, the taxiway at Toke, not on the runway, taxiway, and on the other side of the taxiway, the cat had taken and mounded the dirt just to get it off the runway. So I'm on this side, and I went out in front, and I'm prop starter. You set your throttle, not full blast, but you set it. It can't be on, it can't be off. It's got to be on. You got to prime it. So you prime your engine. You turn your mags on. You switch. You set your throttle. I'm out there and I prompted it, and of course I set it too much. And so well, I'm running around to grab the strut to get in the airplane. I jumped in my airplane, and it's going forward, of course. And I jumped in there and ready to hit the brakes, right, with your heel. Hit the brakes, and the seat broke off, and I'm flying into the back seat. I'm like, and the airplane's going across. I went up the other side of that hill, 3/4 of the way before I was finally able to crawl out of the back of that plane and get on those brakes to stop that airplane. Or else I was going to go over the top. Jeez. Another incident. But it just that airplane there, another story. That airplane was ratty.
Yeah.
And Hooker was the guy I bought it from. He's a doctor in Kotzebue. And when he crashed that, and he was in and excited and took it off the sandbar, and he had his wife with it. And she's 8.5 months pregnant. Remember, she's big. But anyway, he dumps it in the river upside down. So he's floating down the Kobuk River. And he has to get out, and he's able to get out and get her on the airplane and tie that airplane over to the side. And, they were okay. The airplane's soaked. But anyway, when I went to Toke, I was looking for another cruiser at that time. It was a cruiser. And I bought that from him. And I fixed it up. I drained everything, put new oil in it. Kobuk's a pretty clear stream. It's not a real silty stream like the Matsu, And it ran okay. But it was ratty. I had a fuel selector valve over here. And I had a leak in the valve, so I just took a knife and cut the fabric and got in there and fixed it. And I'm not going to take time to fix it. I just duct taped it.
Yeah.
And then the throttle, when I'd land, I could only get it down about 1,200 RPM, maybe 10 RPM. So, when I landed, I made sure I had place well. In this, that's another story. When I land on sandbars, I'd have to turn the engine off so that the prop was not giving me forward thrust.
So like as soon as your wheels touch, mixture, just
Before our wheels touched, I'd make sure that thing that prop would be just windmilling by itself. I had to make sure I had strafed the runway enough times that I was going to get into it. And I'll tell you the Tony Conrad story about that later on. Okay,
this is like a normal thing for you when you're landing.
On that airplane. Yeah, that airplane was ratty. I ended up taking that airplane apart. This one you saw on its nose, that's that airplane, but I rebuilt it, repainted it. I put 17 different modifications in it. I had tough gears. I really dolled that one up. Of course, the first flight, I went and put it on its nose. And
the first flight?
The first flight out with that airplane. I had spent 2 years building it, rebuilding it. And man, I can land anywhere. You can land anywhere. You might not take off everywhere, but you can land anywhere. And that's that picture you see on its nose. That's that airplane. I'll tell you a story on that one again.
Go ahead.
Oh, you want to hear that one?
Sure, yeah.
This is in Tok now. We're already left Kotzebue. I got two or three
more
more
incidents.
Go back to
Kotzebue.
Go back to Kotzebue. A couple more incidences up there.
Do you want
3 incidents I know of.
Well, tell me about the putting the 12 on its nose though, because we're already there.
Oh, we're already on the nose job. Anyway, this is my Batman airplane. You notice you saw the wings were all Batman wings. They came back. I painted those. Really nice paint job. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going up in the Mitchells. The southern rim of the flats, she had moose on it like you couldn't believe. I mean, when you see a moose, you got to find a place to land, right?
Yeah, right then.
I found this place where a helicopter had a barrel on the side of that one right there. Now, see this right here? See this, Care? That's my landing strip right there. Because that's a helicopter landed there. And I'd land on that, it's 100, 150 feet wide. I'd land on that, and then I'd cruise up this hill here, and that would stop me.
Yeah.
I'd been in there. Right. I'd been in there a couple times already, but this time I didn't make it. So I sent Schultz and Korb across the valley with an old rig, and we shot this moose, and they were going to take it off the side of the hill, pack it up to that airplane, and I was going to fly the meat all out. Well, I went in there, once, because I was kind of watching them down in the valley about 2 or 3 miles away and seeing what they're doing and how close they are getting to the thing. And so I'd land, I'd go back to my Mitchells strip where my mall was all crashed up. And I come in again. Well, they came in this time, and it's getting to be dusk. So your peripheral, your vision just a little foggy, not quite what it should be. And I came in just a little too hot, and it's only about 100 to 150 feet of flat area. Then it's like 150, 200 feet of, maybe 20-degree incline. Not enough that's not going to hurt you. You can land on 20 degrees easy. And so I'd land and boom, 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 stop, turn around. I'd leave the airplane up on this incline and take off. And there was a big cliff on the other side.
Perfect.
So the third time in there, I landed a little hot, and I hit that incline with my wheels, and the airplane starts porpoising. And I'm back on the stick. I'm trying to hold that tail down. And I'm just doing boom, and that's where you see right there. I'm sitting on my nose. The prop is bent. I've got my cowling. I was worried about my oil breather in the front end of the thing, and of course I'm not happy, and so Schultz is coming up over the hill with a pack of meat, him and Korb, and they're packing meat, and they look cross over up here about half a mile, and they see this airplane on its nose. Well, they think I'm dead. They think I'm over the hill, crashed, landed, and dead, and this Schultz has got a 200-pound pack of meat on it. He's running the rest of it.
Jeez.
And he ran up there, and of course I'm running around the airplane. Well, the helicopter people had left a 55 drum, and I don't know if it had gas or not, but it was there at that landing strip. And so I've got a bent prop, of course. It's, probably a 30-degree bend, pretty good bend. And so I took the prop off, put it on that drum, and I had a real thick coat, and I put it around the prop, because when you start hammering on a metal prop, you basically have a good chance of breaking it or bending it enough that it's not going to work. And I didn't want to do that. But I had a single bitted axe with a flat end on. I would hit that thing as hard as I could hit it. And I got it out to where it might have been a 10-degree bend. And I figured, that'll go around. So I'd put it back on the airplane. And I got up on the side of the hill, and I had the boys hang onto the struts. I could get about 2150 out of it.
Yeah.
Well, you can fly at 2150. Taking off is not the best thing at 2150. You'd like 2700 or some kind of RPM to get you a little power. But I figured, well, I'm up here. If I get down to that flat area, and if I dive off that cliff at 30 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour, I'm going to fall fast enough that I'm going to gain airspeed and get out of there, because it's pretty straight. So I had the boys hold on to the airplane, and they're out there hanging on the wings, and I pour the power to it, and it's getting up 2100, and the airplane, when a prop's bent, you know it. It's shaking the whole plane. I said, Sam, I think this is going to fly. So I said, let go. And the boys let go, and down over there, poop, and I dropped over that cliff. And of course, they can't see the airplane now. It's down over the cliff. And they run down to the side of that cliff, and they think I'm burning down there. They look out in the valley, and here I am flying along down there. I got enough airspeed to make it down to my strip in the middle of Mitchell's. And I had a meat cache there because we'd been hauling meat out. But I was not going to go down in the woods without some kind of food. So I stopped at Mitchell's, put a quarter of meat in the back end of me, because if I'm going down, I'm going to be able to eat, And I got out of that plane and took off that strip. I probably had 600 feet, so it flew. And I flew out to the road. It's 20 miles out to the Taylor Highway. Wow. I wasn't going to fly overland to Tok because there's no place to land anywhere there. I flew out to the highway, and and you'd be going along, and I'm flying along. You get used to it, right? Like in a car, you get used to the RPMs. And then the wind would hit it over here, and I go, whoa, and I'm, geez. I died 27 times on the way down to Tok. And I got to Tok, and I came for a landing, and I had a 135 I had a 150 in that. And but it was an old, I don't really do too many flight mechanical tests on. So I landed, and you know how the oil breather has two ports coming into the oil breather in the front of the engine? And they were so old, though, that the nuts had vibrated off from all that time. And those pipes were so corroded into the oil filter, they stayed there. But there were no nuts holding them on. Again, new story. God was responsible for a lot of my flying, okay? God wasn't skill, because I can remember a couple times where I thought I was dead. And here I am. So, anyway.
And I mean, I love these stories. I think that anyone that would behave in this way is totally irresponsible.
What was that word? No, nuts, crazy. But really, you didn't think of those as death-defying. You just thought of those as
you're just kind of doing your deal.
Incidences to come over, get over them, and get into the air for the next time.
Yeah, that's crazy. The thing that I would like to ask you about is the polar bear hunting. Like, how many times have you done that?
Probably, a good half dozen, 10 times.
So you've done it enough to
I'm
understand.
not a polar bear hunter, though. Polar bear hunting is not hunting. It's the plane doing the work. You go out and you spot a polar bear. Okay, he's on a lead. He's on a oogurk, or he's on a seal, or he's walking. The plane spots him. The plane goes up and lands in front of him somewhere behind the ice field. Usually, we take the other plane and herd it. If a bear is here and you want him to go over there, you just fly out this way, and that bear he'll try and get away from that airplane, that noise. And then you get him up there, and you come within a couple hundred yards and shoot him, and skin him out.
So when Ron told me all the stories about polar bear hunting, he didn't tell me about the herding part.
Oh, he did kind of. He said that. I remember listening. He did say something about they will shy away from the noise of an airplane. Well, they will, but he didn't say that they were absolutely trying to hurt him. I don't. Fishing game, you don't hear this, okay? But that.
Yeah.
You don't always get a bear where you want the bear to be.
Yeah.
Or you lose the bear.
So
I've got movies of bears running along on the airplane with the cubs and stuff swatting at us, and they don't like you. They do not like airplanes. And so I got a bear, Huda got a bear, Harold got a bear, Remmer got a bear. So
how many have you shot yourself?
I've just shot one.
Okay.
I don't. I could be in the airplane, or I could be helping.
But you've been involved enough. You're acting like you haven't done it. You've been involved enough that you can give me some insight into it. Because after I interviewed Ron, thinking back on it, I'm like, there's all these questions I have about logistics of it. Like, how does it work? And could we pull the map up that I had? Because I want to just look at the map a little bit, and I want you to get an idea, because he was talking about going to Russia.
I've been high enough up that I can see Russia right out the mountains over there. I'm not a Russian hunter though. See, the big boys hunt there.
Yeah.
Because
You were around
they
these
have
guys,
a certain
right?
amount of time they have to get a bear to be able to get back, in time. So they want to go out where the concentration of bears are. And I'm not going to overhunt them, but I have hunted around the Point Hope, Point Lisburn area, along the leads. Point Hope sits out in a point. Russia sits out in a point. The Arctic ice comes in, and it comes into a narrow, like a venturi. And so when it comes in there, that ice is moving and crushing, and
And that's kind of the sort of
you
good
get pressure.
habitat
You get a
for bears.
pressure ridge. Sometimes the pressure ridge will be 30 feet tall.
So you guys are flying out of.
Okay, here's Kotzebue.
Yeah.
Okay, there's Kivling. There's Point Hope. Point Lisburn's right here. So here's the points right here. That's the narrowest part. There's a real narrow part. That's where the ice crushes in. And so we'd fly. Well, we could fly here, but I didn't like to be over here with the big boys because they're hunting for professionally. So what we do is, this is a nothing area. We'd hunt here where the ice comes around and leads would develop. And so we'd fly up until we found a lead, then we'd follow the leads until we found a bear. I remember one time we coming in, and we were probably off of, Point Hope area, 50 miles.
Yeah.
And we're following leads. We're always looking for leads.
Yeah.
So I was a lead hunter. We didn't basically come to a track. We'd come to a lead.
Yeah,
and we'd follow that lead until we see blood, which is a dead seal or a dead oogurk. They love oogurks because they're slower, bigger, and more food. And then when you got to there, you could see the bear tracks going out from them. So, and we'd follow that until we find a bear. And then I'm coming in one time, and I'm following this lead, and we're working on it, and I see way up, you can see a long way. Ron said if you saw 15 miles, well, if you get up 2,000 feet, you can see a lot more than 15 miles. The curvature here is 18 miles, and on a clear day, you can see 50 miles, and following his lead, and, oh my God, I see a herd of oogurk, all kinds of oogurk.
What is an oogurk?
It's a big seal, a 2-ton seal. That they shoot them. They're good eating. They're like a big walrus, except they're not a walrus. They're a big seal. Well, we're coming over. Point Hope sits out on that point, good 5-6 miles.
Yeah.
And then where they say Woonok, that's Point Lisburn up there.
Okay.
That's a military base.
Okay.
So I'm flying along, and oh God, look at the oogurk right up there. Look at them. And so we're thinking we're going to find bears.
Yeah.
It's Point Hope, and it's the village, and there might be 5 or 6 buildings there.
So it's not. It's
and that time it wasn't. I thought I was going on my bears, but usually we get out there and hunt, and you're out there 50 miles, and you're probably less because the leads are closer to the land than they are out in the center. And we'd hunt, and usually it's not good weather. I mean, not perfect weather, but we'd get through with that, and we had no navigational aids. Cape Lizard put out a beam on an HF beam. We can follow that periodically. Kotzebue put out a beam, and they're about 90 degrees apart when you're out there. I got to talk to you about the beams, okay? In those days, HF radio put out 4 beams, one north, one east, one south, one west. And on that beam, they broadcast a signal. And on the right of that signal, it would be the Morse code letter A, dida, 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 dida. So if you got dida, dida, you knew you were on the right-hand side of that beam, so you'd go left until on the left-hand side, it would go da-did, 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 and you got it on your earphones. So you'd know, well, I passed the beam. So when you finally get to that beam, it'll go D, because NA and AN overlap each other, and go D. And if you could follow that beam, D, you'd go right into Lisburn or right into Kotzebue. Now, you didn't know, because the compasses are worthless. Compass is 30 degrees off. You're going to go north, you might be going west. You might be going east, you don't know. You basically, hopefully, you can see sun or something. And so we came into the.
So do you know if you're going to or from the station?
No. Another story. When I first came, let me finish this one, okay? So we'd followed that beam, and of course it didn't broadcast through ice hummocks. It didn't broadcast through mountains because it would bounce and stop. So we'd follow it in bad weather. It'd be snowing, and you could see a mile or a half mile, and you're flying. So we'd fly along until where we thought we were headed into Point Hope or Lisburn, somewhere into that area, or even down as far as Kivalina. But we were coming back that way, we hoped. We didn't know where we were. As soon as we hit the land, the ice changes because it hummocks and goes up, and you got a 50, 100-foot bank, and land. So you would have to make a decision. Am I north of Point Hope? Am I south of Point Hope? Am I north of Kivalina? Am I south or north? We didn't like to be north of Lisburn, because north of Lisburn is right here. Boom.
Got it. Okay.
Because up here is Wainwright and Barrow.
You got to go way.
Yeah,
you're not going to find land.
We didn't like to be there. We always kind of cheated south. But as soon as you come in there, you'd hit the land and you'd make a decision. Do I go north to Lisburn, which is a strip that goes right straight into a mountain, or do I go south toward Point Hope? Because Point Hope has gas. So we'd mostly end up at Point Hope, and we'd be late. It'd be dark coming in, and so we'd tie our planes down there, and we'd sleep on the floor by the Franklin store at that time, or we'd beg gas from somebody to get home to Kotzebue. See, it's still, well, how far is that? That's a good 100 miles down to Kotzebue yet. And so, we'd usually stay overnight and then hit out the next morning. And we always carried catalytic heaters and engine calling covers. So you put your engine to bed.
Yeah.
In the morning, it's going to be cold. So
it's 145 miles.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. There's a cruising stern is right in, I'm going to say it's, God dang it, right in here. The winds get so bad there that in a Cub, you can't fly against them. You're going to go 0 miles an hour. They're 100-mile-an-hour wind. Tony Bernhardt lost his daughter up there one time. She was flying to Kivalina, I think. Never did find her. And she got out of that wind, and of course she's being blown to Russia, and she's in I think she's in a 180 at that time. And, the winds are so strong, it's blowing her out, and never did find her. Never did find that airplane.
So you're I was asking you whether you can go to or from the station.
You really don't know. When I first came to this, I'm getting into the second story about navigation.
Yeah.
Okay. So in my old cruiser, I had an HF radio, which was, in those days, was one of the bigger things. Because, an Omni station, that was a coffee grinder you couldn't use once you get in the mountains. So I had an HF radio, and I had learned how to fly on an HF beam, and I knew my A's and my N's, and I came out of Anchorage going to Kotzebue, 60 hours under my belt, whatever it took me to get from Mesa, Arizona to Anchorage. And I went through Rainy Pass. I've always heard about Rainy Pass, and I'm by myself, and I got gas cans in the back end, 5-gallon Blazel cans, and I've got my survival gear, da-da-da-da. And I came through Rainy Pass, and, to this day, I don't want to go through there again. And I'm bouncing around there like a dumb ping pong ball. And gas cans are flying off the top of my ceiling, my plane, and landing in the back end. Needless to say, at 60 hours, I'm kind of scared.
Right.
And I get out to finally get through. Luckily, got out to Farewell, and it gets smooth. And I go to McGrath, and I land on McGrath. Oh, sheesh, But McGrath has an HF beam going out. One goes to Unalakleet, one goes down to Bethel, one goes to Galena, and the other beam goes back toward Anchorage. So I'm taking off, and it's bad weather, and it's raining, and it's windy, and and I'm saying, yeah, but I'll make it, nothing's going to stop me. And I get on this beam. Hey, I got the beam. So I'm following this beam along, da da whoop da da da, and I'm going to Unalakleet, and I fly for an hour, and you're supposed to go to the Yukon. I'd never flown there before. I'm by myself, and the Yukon River. You're supposed to follow that. Well, the goddamn river's not coming up, So I'm flying this beam, dee-da, and I finally said, gee, I got a Harold, when we flew, he says, Gary, if you ever get lost, go IFR. I don't mean instrument braiding. I mean, I follow the river. And I said, well, there's a river way over there. I fly over to this river, and I started, it was the Yukon, but I didn't know what the Yukon looked like in those days. And so I'm following this river, and following this river, and following this river. I had been following the beam to Bethel instead of the beam to Unalakleet. And of course the river is here. And I got it, and I said, well, I follow the river, so I come to this little village. Hey, Harold's right. So I'm going to land downtown, down by the river, and there's a little tiny strip road there with a windsock. So I figured, I'm down 200 feet, 100 feet off the river, flying. I figured I got to land there. Oh, boy, that's awful small. So I, conquer down, and I come in, and I strafing that, and the big building right at the end of this runway. And what it is a storage building for the barges on the river. There's a dock road. It's not an airstrip. But there is a windsock there. And so I said, I'm not going to make it. I'm going to have to go follow the river more. So I pour the power to it, and I get a little elevation, and I look right over there. Here's a 3,000-foot paved runway. I was at St. Mary's, which is 80 degrees off of where I was headed.
Direction, yeah.
Well, I landed, and nobody sold me gas. It was a Wien-operated airport, and nobody sold me gas. I shake my wings. I have the little glass tubes that hang down out of the wings. That's how you determine whether they weren't electric gauges.
Right.
And I said, I guess I'm going to have to go. So I went there, and then St. Michael's is on the way on the coast, and then there's Unalakleet. I'm going to say it's 90 miles from St. Mary's, maybe more. I said, well, if I don't make it, I'm going to crash on the beach, so I followed the beach. And I'm coming into Unalakleet, and I'm shaking my wings, hoping I could get that bubble to indicate some kind of gas. Well, my left tank won't even move. It's dry. My right tank has maybe a quarter inch. I could see Unalakleet up ahead of me, maybe 15 miles. I said, boy, I can walk that. If I crash, I can walk. I've got 62 hours under my belt by now.
Yeah. I
made it into Unalakleet. I bought a 50-gallon drum of gas. The airplane would take 36. It took 35. Yeah, I was breathing fumes coming. I had a friend that taught school there, and I stayed the night with them. And then I flew up over that. I flew over the Koguariks, on over Elephant Point, and came into Kotzebue, and I never left Kotzebue for 2 years. After that, I flew the Kobuk, flew the No Attack, flew the Colville.
So you just told me the story of how you brought that Super Cruiser.
Yeah,
to
now
Kotzebue.
I'm in Kotzebue with my plane, buddy.
That is
I have
such
my
a
own
great
plane.
story.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I used to fly out to Pikes Point, which is about 12 miles from Kotzebue. When I first was there, I had a little snow go, and it was a little Andy, the one lunger, one piston, 12 horsepower. I mean, nothing, but it's all I had. So I'd go 30 miles out of Kotzebue. I'd go I mean, nobody would take me hunting there because I was a Chichaco. I'd go myself. And I went one time, the first year, and I didn't have an airplane. And I went over Kotzebue Spit back about by Buckland or Deering and got out on the ice, and I followed the Kotzebue Peninsula down because, you know, like it was 200-foot bank. And I had Kimry. I'd built a little dog sled, so I had Kimry on a buddy of mine on the sled. And we're going along, and all of a sudden, you know, I'm in the water, clear to my knees. What the heck? Well, I didn't know it, but there's a soft spot in the ice about 15 miles out of Kotzebue.
Wow.
And I got excited, of course, and I knew I was in trouble. Well, I didn't understand that in those days that overflow, there's a bottom to it, an ice bottom. It doesn't necessarily sink down into the ocean.
Yeah.
So I'm in 2-foot water, and I cut my sled loose because it was rope, and I got my machine 100 yards back out of this overflow, got Kimry out of there, and I got to go back and get my sled, and there's blood all over the ice. I'd gotten so excited I'd ruptured the membranes of my nose, and I'm putting this blood on the ice. And I got the sled back out and got it hooked up. Well, of course, we're wet now, you know, and it's kind of dangerous. We know we got to get to Kotzebue now.
What time of year is this?
This is wintertime.
So it's like-
I'm saying December.
So it's like below zero.
Oh, yeah, 20 below. Yeah, it's windy and 20 below. And so I says, Kimry, we gotta move. We can't stay still. So I crouched to the bank closer to get by the overflow, and I'm coming down this Pikes Pit, which is 12 miles from town, and there's a little old cabin, sod, and it's an Eskimo cabin. And I don't care. Let's see if anybody lives here. I went and knocked on the door. Pete and Lita Sladler is the name. He was a Norwegian, and she was an Eskimo lady, an older couple. And they welcomed me in there, and they dried us out and got us, you know, they saved our lives, basically. And I got back to Kotzebue, and so I would go out there and visit them. I'd take them sugar or coffee or something, you know. And she fished through the ice. He would drill a hole in the ice here, then about 30 more feet, drill another hole, and then he had a big toque that he'd put a rope on, and he'd come under the ice with the toque until they touched each other, and they'd grab the loop on the end of a rope.
What is a toque?
A toque is a big stick, maybe 20 feet long or 15 feet long.
So they were feeding it through.
Under the ice,
Got it.
feeding the rope through from one hole to another hole to another hole until they got 100 fathoms. That was their nets.
Wow.
And he would put a 100 fathom, 6 foot deep net under the ice, and he'd have a rope on one end, and that net's under the ice like this now, and he'd catch she fish in it.
Wow.
And then when he pulled it, he'd put a rope here, and he'd pull that net, and I'd go out and help him pick fish, and I'd help him dig the tote holes, you know.
Yeah.
And he was probably 80 years old. I mean, he was an old man, and he outworked me. And so I'd go out and help him pick fish.
Yeah.
I'd take him stuff on the weekend, and a lot of times I'd get people at the school, all had snow goes. We'd take afternoon trips out there just to visit, because he had dog teams. He didn't have snow goes. The snow goes were just coming in. My first year in Kotzebue, I bought a little Andy. The snow goes are just starting to be on sale that year. That was 1965.
Yeah.
And there were dog teams before that. Then, in fact, when snow goes came in, no longer had to feed dogs. So you'd go back some of the trails outside of Kotzebue going on, there'd be dead dogs everywhere. People could just go out and shoot their dogs. I mean, you know, a snow go is so much more economical to take care of. And I've been down.
Yeah, they don't have to. That's such a liability to have to feed those, catch all those extra salmon and process them for the winter.
And you know, when the snow go came along, that was a big invention for the North Country, I think. That, and of course the rifle, you know. And so you'd find dogs dead everywhere. I mean, everybody had a sled dog team of 20 dogs, and then all of a sudden nobody had them.
That's crazy. I never thought about like what did they do?
No, yeah. What did they do with them all? No, I'll tell you what
That's
they did.
crazy. I did not know that.
I'll tell you what. You didn't hear that fishing game, but that's people didn't need them anymore. When the caribou herds come, everybody jump on a snow go. See, when the caribou herds come through, the $400,000 park right here come through.
The 400 what?
Thousand. There were a lot of animals. I got pictures of flying over. It looked like ants everywhere. Everybody try and go out there and get as many as they could because they're only going to be there a certain amount of time, and that fed the village. Well, when the snow go came along, 10 snow goes to go over to Shosholick, and they'd shoot 200. They'd pile them in a big pile. In the springtime, they'd only eaten 100 of them, okay? So in the springtime, the ravens would be so black in the sky, from 10 miles away, you did not dare fly over Shosholick because you'd be hitting birds. They would be on these piles of birds.
So they would sort of go out there with their dog team or their
the
snow go, sorry, and go, well, we're getting low, go grab another one of those caribou that's just sitting over there.
They'd shoot 200,
And they would just leave them there.
Well, then they stockpile them, put them in a big pile. I went over one hunt. I was hunting for Willie Willowa. In fact, I see a Willowa on the basketball magazine. He was going to sell caribou for wild reindeer. Even though they're caribou, there was a commercial difference. So he wanted a hunter. So I got myself and Carlos Zemmer and Bill Rimber. Bill was a resident. Carlos was an alien to the United States, and I was a resident. So I could shoot the law in those days. I could shoot 2,000 of them and not get picked up. I mean, it's a waste to me. But we shot 77 caribou, and I put them all field dressed, every one of them, put them in a pile. And then we started hauling them. It's 30 miles from Shosholick back over to Kotzebue, across the ice. And every night after school, it's dark, go over and get a load, probably 15, boom, bring them back. We
were hauling.
The third night, we left the school, went over there, it's dark, and I noticed it was getting mushy, a lot of overflow. And of course, we're going through it with snow goes, fast as we can. Get a load, and we brought them back. We'd get back 1 or 2 in the morning, it was a load. We got back, we noticed it was wet, it was getting wetter and wetter, but, we weren't too worried about it. We thought it was just overflow. And so we got them, I stashed them in a little building, and I give them away to all the people that needed caribou. And next morning I get up, and the whole Kotzebue Sound, 30 miles of the ice, gone, all water. The ice was moving out. That when we came back, the ice was floating out to the sea. We were damn lucky. Thank you, Lord. See, I'd like to tell you, it's not necessarily my skills that got us through.
That's crazy.
Okay.
Okay, so Ken, there's a couple other questions, and you say you're not the expert polar bear hunter.
No.
But since we've talked about it before, you were there when those guys were doing it.
Right.
I would like to ask you a few other questions about it. When Ron told me about it, some of the things that I never got out of him was like, okay, first, what time of year was this? They were doing it.
No, December, February.
Okay. So it's at the darkest time of the year.
Oh yeah, you only had three hours of light and then maybe 2 hours of dusk. Yeah, by 3 in the afternoon, you better be somewhere because it's going to get dark.
So you're leaving around 10 a.m. or something?
They're leaving in the dark. They're flying out, and
so they're
time
flying
they get over
across
Russia, they got to have light to hunt. I mean,
Right.
you can't hunt them in the dark.
So when they would take off from Kotzebue or Point Hope and fly over toward Russia,
Yep.
and he was saying they didn't stop until they saw
They'd be 5 miles, 7 miles off the coast. Art Fields one time,
but it's like 100 miles or something. How far is that? Here,
Probably 100. Yeah, I know it's an hour's flying time at least.
Yeah.
And my plane do 90 miles an hour, without a headwind.
So like Point Hope to the closest place in Russia, if you flew straight there, it was 150 miles.
Yeah, that's right.
So they're flying out and then they're finding a polar bear, killing it, skinning it.
Come back, and you got a Super Cub that's got burning 8 gallons an hour, high times, thinned out, maybe a little less. and they got 18. Some of them have belly tanks, though. So even in those days, they had belly tanks. So they got 5 hours of flying time, 6 hours of flying time. Some of the time they're on the ice too. They're not flying, you know. So what we would do, we'd take off and fly at a 270-degree heading. You know, you didn't know if you were 270 or if you were at 180 or if you were at 300, but 270, then let down. You know, you didn't have to worry about it at 3,000 feet. You're not going to see a hell of a lot at 3,000 feet. But then you let down and start looking. And they let down over in Russia because that's where the concentration of bears were.
Because it actually saves time because they waste a lot of time looking for a bear otherwise.
Yeah, they don't waste time. They know. In fact, one of the years there was a whale that was frozen in the ice, and they vector to that whale as soon as they could because there'd be 50 bears on that. I mean, there'd be 25 bears, a lot of bears. And they go out and find a bear. And don't tell them that they spend a lot of time tracking bears and a lot of time hunting bears. You don't on polar bears. You find a bear and you sit down in front of them and you're hoping that they're coming right to you. At least they're following the lead. You know, they're not going to get away from those leads.
So what you're saying is, and what you kind of alluded to before is, they're flying, they come into a lead, maybe they follow the lead, they find a bear.
Yeah.
And so they're going to go around the bear and land, and then their buddy's going to come back here and herd it in.
They're watching what that bear is doing too, which way it's headed. You know, they're not going to, if the bear is heading up the lead, they're not going to land over here. They're going to go sit up here in front of them somewhere. Maybe.
And if they need to, though.
Oh, yeah.
Buddies.
And you need to a lot of times because let's just say you're landing 5 miles or a mile ahead of that bear. That's noise. That bear knows something's up there.
Yeah.
So he might be heading this way, away from that noise. Well, if you take off and get the noise this way, that bear's going to turn back and go. Yeah, and that's common.
Was that illegal at the time? Because flying and hunting the same day was legal, right? But
nothing's illegal.
Yeah.
You think
they're in Russia?
You think? Oh, yeah. I was telling you a story about Art's over there one day, and they're out there cleaning a bear. And Art Field's the guy that taught himself how to fly. He was one of my buddies. He's one of the old timers in Kotzebue. He lived in Kotzebue, and he's cleaning the bear, and this trimotor airplane comes and lands next to him. Well, it was Russia. And it was one of their security people. And they came out and they couldn't converse, but he had a bear, knife, and he traded knives with them. And so one of the guys had some kind of wrestling knife. Art traded. Art didn't get back to Kotzebue, an hour later, 2 hours later. The FBI was there.
Hey guys, we'll get right back to the interview, but first, let's talk about the easiest way that you can support us in making more content like this. So this is where we put all of the jobs that are in process. A lot of these are done and ready for shipping. Let's look at how they get to that point. We have patterns for hundreds of different seat models, but if we ever get a seat in here that we don't have a pattern for, the process of making that pattern is actually kind of interesting. This was out of an otter, and we just made this pattern, and so we're gonna show you the process of how that works. So over the years, we have kind of figured out what's comfortable and those shapes and sizes of lumbar and position and things like that. And so what we do is we take those measurements and those already defined characteristics, and we three-dimensionally draft those. This is Jacob, by the way. Hey. And we draft them, or he does, into the computer, and we make this thing. And then we can see how the two pieces of foam will interact and how it'll look, and we can kind of visualize how we want the cover to go on that. Then we go to the other program, and we'll actually flatten all those pieces and make the actual patterns. Once we have the patterns done, we'll cut them out on this table. This table is, a CNC. It uses a rotor blade or a drag knife that actually cuts against this surface here. And there's little holes in this surface, and there's a giant vacuum, and it sucks the material down to the table, and then it just cuts it out. So once we've cut the leather out or the fabric, that's actually only about 10% of the manufacturing process of making a seat like this. There's a lot of little steps that have to be done prior to sewing. And then once you start sewing, there's a lot of tiny little things that need to be done before all the major components come together. And this is where we do all that sewing. Each of our sewing stations has like all the raw materials that they'll need to assemble the seats, like the thread colors, all the threads, the bobbins, the Velcro and things like that. Also, a lot of our seats have decorative stitching, so like an offset larger thread just to make it like pop. And so when we do those jobs, there's 2 sewing machines that we'll use, one with the decorative thread and one with like the regular color thread that matches the leather. Once the covers are done, the foam will get stuffed into the covers, and they'll laminate everything together, and it'll be this beautiful finished product that's ready to install on a frame. All right, guys, that's a short tour of our shop. Thanks for watching. Back to the podcast. Remember, you can just go to sportaircraftseats.com, check it out.
An hour later, 2 hours later, the FBI was there. They have satellite images, and they saw, I'm sure someone on a satellite, they saw this Russian plane meeting this American plane, and they, oh my God, they're trading contraband or something. FBI was there the minute he got out of his plane, and he had to tell them, yeah, I traded for this knife. We shot a bear, and we didn't take any dope. We didn't, thing like that.
Yeah.
Because they watched, the nuclear watched that pretty close.
The other thing that's crazy about that is, that was basically during the Cold War, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, these guys are going over to Russia, flying over there. And, that is
and there had to be
another layer to that
There
story.
had to be a lot of people over there at some times. On a good day, everybody was there. And in Kotzebue, there'd be 40 planes on the ice out in front. Of course, a lot of them were me and Rember and Huda, and, all of us had our planes tied down there too. Most of them were guides, though.
So you
big
have
money.
maybe 20 different groups going.
Oh, yeah, easy.
That's
I
so crazy.
released my airplane out one time to Lee Holden because for some reason he needed another airplane to fill a ticket. I'm sure the fishing game or somebody. And so I said, I leased it to him for a tank of gas or something, no big deal to me.
Yeah.
And the guides were big time for about 2 months in Kotzebue.
They basically,
John Wayne was there one time,
John Wayne?
Yeah.
The actor?
Yeah, the actor. Because there's a lot of famous people who went polar bear hunting in those days.
Wow.
Polar bear hunting was big time. That was a big money hunt. Even those days, probably be a $5,000 hunt. Well, now it's a $50,000 hunt. Well, I don't even think you can hunt them now.
Do you know what kind of modifications they did to those planes to set them up for that operation?
Yeah, like I told you, your plane has all kinds of knobs there we had one. And the heat would come out of the firewall, and it usually go up to the windshield. Well, we'd cut that, and we'd put a flex tube up that we could take. And see, that went up to the panel. Well, you got to have your panel, but we'd put it on the window. And we would, you'd be sitting there in the airplane running because you need the heat of the engine, and you would put this heating tube on the window until you had a 3-4 inch square of view out the side window, right? Not the front window, right about here, because that's where you took off. And you'd fly until the whole window would be clear, and 10 minutes of flying time would probably get it. But I lost a buddy because of that one thing. We'd take off, we'd fly. Our Venturis were providing our vacuum for our artificial horizon, for our, what else takes vacuum? Altimeter takes vacuum. That Venturi, if that froze up, Venturi is all it is a tube that big at the middle, and it goes down to narrow, and it produces a vacuum when that air sucks into you, and your instruments take that vacuum off that Venturi. And it might not be thawed out when you first take off, so you couldn't use your artificial horizon. Well, Bill, bless his heart, bought a 170, a nice big airplane. Well, that winter he was taking off with 4 people on the plane, and of course that's not overloaded, but it's a heavy load. And he taken right off on the runway in Kotzebue on wheels, and his windshield was fogged over, so he's looking out this little hole, or it's foggy. He's waiting for visibility. And he was on his artificial horizon. And of course, the artificial horizon is frozen. So when he go in, the airplane just went like that, upside down, right in the middle of the runway in Kotzebue. Blew up with the 4 people still in it. They were dead and buried and everything else. So it was sad. He was one of my best buddies. I lost Harold. He died of old age though, because he liked to carouse, and he liked his beer, and he liked his cigarettes and stuff. And when he got to be 65, his body just gave out. I lost Bill, my hunting partner there. I lost Billy Stapp, was my hunting partner in Toke, and then he was an on-ground hunting partner. Schultz was another one partner. He's still alive, but he don't look good, does he? I went last year and visited him just to make sure I saw him before he died. All my hunting partner, Spittler, my buddy Spittler, he always wanted to get in that airplane with me and fly and see, we gotta go. But he always gets sick, so I always had a puke bag with him. And finally, when he was like 55, he'd been flying with me for 6-7 years, and we've been moose hunting. He finally went and decided he was going to fly. He bought one of these little kits, from Oshkosh, Kansas, shipped it up to Northway, put it together, flew it that fall.
What was it like?
It's like those little kit planes that you get, that you sit in them, and
Like an ultralight type.
yeah, ultralight. Okay. So he bought it, put it together. Well, then the springtime came along. He gets it out of the garage. He puts it back together. He's not a mechanic, and he knows nothing about fabric. Puts together, goes out flying. 2 days later, nobody heard from him. Well, he'd gone out, and on that ultralight, the fabric on the leading edge of the wing was velcroed on the thing. I'm sure it's a little bit, it wasn't glued, velcroed. Well, he got up in the air, and the leading edge started separating on one of his wings. The fabric flew off of his left wing, and of course, well, those things have a parachute, right? Those ultralights, some of them have a parachute that you're supposed to be able to push. And well, he hit it's a shotgun shell, blows off the door, and the parachute comes out. Well, he blew it. When this wing crippled, it crimped the door for the parachute. Parachute never employed, and down he went. That was my other partner.
Sounds like a great design.
I would be very careful when I'm putting that thing back together, and I should have been there to help him put it together that spring. I just kicked my butt all over for not being there with him. To me, it was just a little toy, though. He taught himself how to fly with a little desk model, and I can't use one of those desk models. I'm not that coordinated.
What the heck is a desk model?
I bought a Cook Inlet. I taught ground school in Toke, and I bought a Cook kit, and it has a panel sitting right like this, and you have a neck on. And you fly that airplane on the artificial horizon, and you come into the airport, and you follow it right in. I could never do it. I wasn't fast enough or long enough or something. I always crashed on the darn thing, always. And yet, I could fly a Super Cub pretty good. A Cub and I were together all the time.
Yeah.
I tell you, you can't beat a Super Cub. That Super Cub, trimmed up, flies itself, right?
Sure.
When I come in for a landing, do you think I'm holding that yoke? No, I'm trimming it up so that I can just kind of come in easy and stuff like that. So if you get in bad weather and you're bouncing all over the place, the last thing you want to do is fight that stick all the time. You got to be a little relaxed. You got to hold on to it, but you got to be a little relaxed so you're not fighting every little bump in the world.
Yep.
And so the Cub is a forgiving airplane.
Yes.
You take them all, you put it in a steep guide, you're going to stall, and it's going to go over on its top. I mean, that's just the way it is. A Cub, when you stall in a turn, you would think, well, if I stall, I'm going to flip over onto the low wing side. No. When you stall, it immediately goes the other way around. You've lost all the lift on the up wing. So we just had Tim Sonnenberg and his buddy just got killed. That was my son's hunting partner.
Was that the guy?
And they were in sheep hunting. They did the old sheep kill, falling a cliff, and they were doing a turn, watching a sheep. And of course, they got too slow, and when you're in a turn, you got to have 10 miles above your stall speed at least. I mean, it to be safe. And they stalled, and of course, he had maybe 60 hours on this. We didn't have much. you're figure you're going to stall away from the mountain. Now you're going to stall into the mountain, and it's exactly what they did. And stalled into it, and 2 or 3 days later, they found the tail of the airplane. Because it burnt. They found a heel, but that was sad because that was Jeff's hunting partners. He's lost a few hunting partners too. So.
Okay, so anyway, you're.
We were talking about. There's been a few times in my life where I thought I was dead. I really did. I knew I was. You asked me about the time level and things slow down. I knew it was slow enough I was dead. There was a moose in this lake, and I had Jim Disjardin and Wyatt with me in a Super Cub, so I had the back end loaded. Not necessarily an empty airplane.
2 grown men in the back.
2 grown men in the back,
okay.
yeah. And so it was next to the Tanana River, and the Tanana River on the outside had pretty good landing sandbars. So I'm coming in, going north, and I'm coming in, and I had to bank the airplane away from the moose and then turn and come in steep to the sandbar. And I cross-coordinated stalled. What that is that since you're banking away, your ailerons are in their up position down. Well, you don't give them time to get a forced air across the lower or the upper aileron, and you stall. So I'm coming in like this, and I got these 2 guys in, and I'm going to land to that sandbar right here. When I came in this way, the airplane went upside down immediately, and I'm only 50 feet. I'm not high at all. I mean, the sandbar's right there. So, I knew I was dead. I grabbed the cabine units, and I just knew I was going in. And when I grabbed those units, I had the thing trimmed up. That airplane, thank God, I know it was you, I know not the airplane. When I grabbed that airplane I was coming in upside down at 50 feet, and the airplane just flipped back up right. I was so close to the landing strip, I just cut the power and landed. It's just about that fast. And I got down, and those guys thought, oh, wow, what a landing. Here, there. Yeah, you realize I'm sitting there peeing my pants. And I knew I was dead, and I never did tell them that was an accident.
Did you just walk around all cocky like?
We went in after the moose. I was so glad we didn't get that moose, because then I'd had to take 2 more strips out of there. I was.
Why were you doing this turn? Was that what was needed to get into the strip?
Yeah, the lake's here, and the moose is down on the lake, so I'm flying north. Well, I didn't have room to just turn and come into the landing strip because it's narrow. So I had to get more space. So I turned away from the moose steeply, and then I had to come back steeply to make that turn into that sandbar.
Okay, so what was the reason you didn't just start your downwind way further out?
Well, it's I know how to fly one of these airplanes, and I just knew everything about it.
Got it.
Yeah, one of those suckers.
I got it.
It was a.
I was curious if there was a reason for it. It was
stupidity.
Yeah, got it.
God is, like I say, that's the one. I've had a lot of this.
Cheers for stupidity. I mean, we all do it.
Yeah. There's one other time. I still haven't gotten together when flying my wife in on accidents. Okay, we'll get to, we'll regress back to Kotzebue here in a bit. But at another time, interior is a lot different flying than the Arctic. You got to really look for land strips. You got to strafe mountaintop. You got to strafe sandbars. Sometimes I'd strafe a landing strip on the sandbar 10 times before I'd finally make the decision that, well, if I really ground loop it, I can stop in time. So I'm going over the dry flats on the way to Mitchell's Ranch. It's probably 50 miles, but there's called the dry lakes in between there. It's a flat area which is all grass. It's dry lakes, we call it, because no water. It's just miles and miles of dry lake. And then there's hills. And so if I could get over to dry lakes in bad weather, I can usually get up the hills on the other side. And usually when you fly, if you fly on the downwind side, the upwind side is pushing the clouds up over the hill. So, you usually have about 25, 50 feet of visibility. even in bad weather. And so I'm going into Mitchell's Ranch, and I'm flying. I'm by myself, and I'm bad weather. And of course, I'm down in dry lakes because it's flat. I know that, but I know I have to get up over those hills, and I'm down at zero. I might have 500 feet visibility, not much, but enough. I knew the land. I knew where I was going, and I'm going up over this hill, and the clouds are right here on the airplane, and I'm following the clouds up over that hill. No hill anymore, all clouds. And I'm pretty close to the top because I knew where I was. And I just kept climbing, and at that time I knew I'm not going to get out of this, And when I got to a certain place where I wrecked the airplane there, I got to that place. I said, I've been in the clouds now for 30 seconds, or what? I've got to be on the other side of the hills. So I started letting down. I'm on artificial horizon, and come out of the hills, and there's Mitchell's Flats out in front of me, and I could see for 50 miles. I'm not 50, 5 miles then.
So you had flown over the hill.
I had flown over the hill, and I was hoping I was over the hill, because if I wasn't, I was starting to let down. And you're
gonna run right in,
dude. No. I was in trouble, and I thought I was dying. I really did. I thought, well, I'm not going to make this, but I'm going to try it. And I tried, and of course, then I stayed out in the rats until the weather improved, and I got back. Same thing. I didn't think I was dying, but I flew the Mosquito River down on over to Molly Strip, which is another strip that a mining company built a strip on the other side of the 40 mile, and they had a 1,000-foot runway. And then when they first went in, they had about a 300-foot runway down about a mile down below it. And I had Jeff and Jeannie with me at that time. They were about 10, that's my kids.
Okay.
And they were about 10, 12 years old. And I wanted to get in there and go caribou hunting. And so I got down the river, and I'm flying down below the trees. And I popped up over the hills into the 40 mile, and I'm flying the 40 mile down until I thought I recognized the Molly River coming down. And so I said, well, it's up there. And of course, it's in the clouds.
What's in the clouds?
The airstrip.
Oh, got it.
But I knew where it was, and I knew I thought I could make it up there. And I at this time I never thought about dying. I just knew that if I got in trouble, I would peel off to the left and follow the valley back down into the 40 mile river area. That's my thinking. And so I'm flying up there, and it's weather, and I come across, and I see this airstrip. Oh shit! Well, it was the lower airstrip, and I knew what it looked like. I said, oh, that's the lower airstrip. I cut the power and landed right in. Come out of the clouds. There's the upper airstrip right there. Whoop! We went caribou hunting, got a caribou, and and everything. We landed pretty close to not making it, but it's not like that other time climbing the hills, and that wasn't like coming in upside down. I mean,
so the thing, I mean, I really appreciate you coming doing this podcast. But I mean, the thing that I think, I mean, and I know because I've posted enough things on the internet that there's going to be comments that are like, this guy's kind of an idiot, So and I don't mean, so
I told you it's not skill.
Yeah. Right.
That guy up there helped me.
This is my question to you, because I do think there's a tremendous amount of value in these experiences.
Yeah.
What advice would you give someone that's younger, that's listening to this and sort of glorifying it in their mind?
Stay out of bad weather.
Yeah.
I mean, weather kills everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear these pilots in this fall time going down. They're not going down because of turbulence. They're going down because of bad weather. Or they're going down in a spiral. They're in such a steep bank that they stall out at 200 feet, and you can't recover a stall at 200 feet, usually, unless you have a Super Cub.
Well, no, we're not doing that. Yeah. That is not advice right there.
Yeah, and look at there. See, you got a Scott Tailwheel? My God, that's big time. I have broke more tail wheels off of airplanes because they're not Scots, and I couldn't afford a Scott. A Scott was $800.
What did you have?
I had like a ball, regular ball, or a little tiny hard rubber one. You've seen those on Cubs, right?
Yeah.
And basically you break the springs, and that thing will hold on spring, be flopping around against your aileron. Go, pop, 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 pop. You're flying along. What the hell was that noise? Well, it's the tail wheel broke off, flopping against your rudder, and it's just beating the crap out of your rudder. And you got to land. And when you land, you got to stay up on your wheels just as long as you possibly can, or you're going to get the rest of your rudder.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I finally end up, my last airplane, I had Scott tail wheels, but I couldn't afford those in the old days, you know. So I've broken off. I broke off one going into Tetla one time. Had my mom, Joe Young, and Joe Young's daughter and my mall taken off, overloaded, got to the end of the runway, not going to make it. Pulled flaps, got off. Well, hit the tail wheel on the end of the bank on the river there, broke it right off. And I got to go back to Tok with that airplane. Boom, boom, pop, 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 bam, bam. And then I have to land with all those people without ruining my airplane, you know. And I broke off the tail wheel. And that was the last small tail wheel I had. I says, honey, you're getting another job so I can afford a tail wheel. Honey, it was like that. Honey, you're getting another job so I can get a prop. Honey, you're getting another job. I need a new set of gears. Honey,
I got to meet this lady.
Yeah, we saved more money by not flying. And, you know, my wife was so happy when I stopped flying and saved her all kinds of money. She's actually got a savings account now. You know? But
What a saint.
coming down the Noatak one time with Bill, this is a story, okay? It's actually a money story, but it's a story. And we're falling down the Noatak. We'd come up over the Redstone, and we're way up at the headwaters and run into herd of caribou out on the river flats. And so I'll land on this side of that island. Bill, you land on the other side of the island. We'll have the caribou between us. And bam, bada, bam, bada, boom, boom, boom. And so I landed on this side, and Bill landed on the other side. And my airplane's still running. I jump out with my pistol because the caribou right here. They're not 500 yards away. They're 25 feet. Yeah. And so I'm running by my airplane shooting caribou. And I looked up my airplane, holy crap, I got a log that size sitting through my landing gear. And on the back end of it, I got a log that size sitting through my trim tab. See that hole right there? Sitting right through there. Bam, 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 I shoot. We shot 11 caribou. And then I go back and look at my airplane because I knew I had something wrong, but big deal. It's just a log.
Well, how did it get? I'm confused at what happened.
Well, I landed, and there's dry logs on the sandbar, right? So I had landed and popped over the logs or went through them, and I'm more interested in the caribou than I am what's going on in the landing. As soon as that airplane slowed down enough, I just jumped out with a pistol because the caribou are right there. They're running by us. And we shot 11. And then I went back and I looked at that and I thought, holy crap. And so I think I had a meat saw, you know, how you have rib saw and little saw. And I sawed that tree out of my landing gear. It went from my landing gear just like that through to the other one. It was that big around. So that was no problem. It didn't bend my landing gear or nothing. The one back here went through the trim tab hole and out the other side. And of course, duct tape will take care of
So
the
it's coming in at an angle,
yeah,
kind of. Got
like that. And so I thought, dang it, well, that worm gear in there, it's probably an inch and a half worm gear. And that's what controls your trim tab.
Yeah.
You crank it in there and that gear goes up and down and your stabilizer goes up and down. Well, you know, we dress out these animals and everything. And I got what happened? Oh, I could see I couldn't fly. Because I needed an elevator. I think I needed a stabilizer or two. It was a little more serious than just the gear. So we flew back to Kotzebue in Bill's airplane, took a loaded caribou in Bill's airplane, and flew back to Kotzebue. It was probably an hour flight, an hour and a half, 100 miles. Got Gene Stark with it to get me a stabilizer. I didn't change the gear at that time. But I got a new stabilizer because it was gone. I mean, it was wrecked. Yeah. I couldn't put enough tape on it to fly. So you know it's bad, right?
Yeah.
Because you could tape a fuselage up if you want.
I mean, part of me is almost thinking this could have been considered a wreck.
Well,
No, I'm kidding.
it's an incident. An incident.
Got it. Sorry.
Don't use that wreck word. Fishing. FAA will be here tomorrow. I mean, they're going to say, oh, there is no statute of limitation. We know.
Whatever. I think you're kind of scared of the FAA. I almost think you.
Well, we didn't really get too many inspections on our.
Of course you didn't.
When we had our monthly or yearly inspection, sometimes we flew down to White Mountain to get old Hope, he was the mechanic or the FAA, to give us write us out the inspection, and we might have done that only every 2 years instead of 1 year. So
You're talking about.
But anyway, we flew back to this place because we had more caribou to pick up. And I got this stabilizer in Bill's airplane, and so we were loaded. We probably had 7 more caribou left, and he got 4, and I got 3 in. And so I take off, and I'm going to trim tab up this thing. Taking off like this, that's no problem because you want it to climb, right? Mm-hmm. But once I got up to airspeed, I couldn't trim that thing up. But what the hell? I had to fly 100 miles pushing that stick just as hard as I could push it to stay level flight. Because as soon as I let go, the airplane, my trim cab worm gear was bent. And I brought it home, and I don't know how stark weather. I think that gear will come out of there if you cut a hole on top of the fuselage. And he got it out and got a new worm gear in there for me. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't fly that airplane a level flight without.
That's crazy.
I know it was enough that I held it like this. I didn't hold it with my hand. I had to hold that, and it got tiring for 100 miles to do that.
I bet.
But there was no place to land, so I was going to make it or I wasn't going to make it. So that was not a death-defying wreck, though. Okay, that was just an incident. Yep, nothing.
Right, you landed, you're safe. You didn't even know your plane was hurt until you couldn't kill him.
Yeah, I'm shooting caribou, and I look back. Oh God, look at that! Oh, geez,
how did that happen? Okay. Something you told me the other day that I thought was interesting is that you said, "Oh, I always wished I would have been a bush pilot." I would consider you a bush pilot, but you said I wasn't old enough to be part of that generation.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Those guys flew by the seat of their pants.
Those guys
did too. Crosland, Ben Allison, Ween boys, Jack Jeffords. Those.
So you're talking about these first people to fly in Alaska, the first 50 people or something.
I love reading their autobiographies.
Yeah.
Love reading them because, they got themselves in weather problems and they got themselves in accident problems that's what you heard. Mm-hmm. You didn't hear about the good times. Have I told you anything about the good flying times I've had? Mm-hmm. Oh, man, I've had some times with a blue sky out. It's calm wind. I love springtime flying.
Yeah.
Because it's calm. You can land anywhere with a pair of skis. I used to take off and toke in the spring. I'd have my skis on. I'd take off just to go fly to lake, to land in lakes, just to land. Sometimes I always had a pair of snowshoes on my wing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I had to tromp out runways to get out of them, but the flying was beautiful. I'm not telling you those stories because they're too nice.
They're boring.
Yeah. I thought of writing a book about what we're doing because I'm sure I could fill a few pages, and I would title that book "A School Teacher Bush Pilot." Mm. Now that sounds like I would fly around the nation as a teacher, mm-hmm. but it was basically I was a school teacher and I flew in the bush. Yeah. And no, I never considered myself that, but I never worried about having a radio.
Yeah.
A couple of my airplanes, I never worried about finished pigment painting them because you're putting in 45 pounds of weight, 50 pounds of weight by putting that yellow on there. When you just got the pigment and it's gray, you're 45 pounds lighter. With a radio, you're 15 pounds lighter. With a battery, you're 30 pounds lighter. That makes a big difference when you're landing on a mountain strip. And I've landed in some tough spots, that probably shouldn't have been landing. I'm a moose hunter. I love moose hunting. How do you get to that moose where you don't have to pack it 5 miles? So you're looking for something around. And then you find a place, and then you got to strafe it. And finally, sometimes I've abandoned my first choices because I just couldn't give myself enough air to get in there. And so I'd look for another place and be a little farther. That reminds me of the Tony Conrad story. This guy in Tok, he weighed 422 pounds, a good friend of mine. He talked like mad and always wanted to fly with me, always wanted to fly. But anyway, I'm coming up the Manacoma Lake one time on the west fork of the Chischina, and I'm flying up there, and there's pretty good moose down there. So I got to get back in there. Well, Tony, Gary, you got to take me. You got to take me. Oh, yeah, oh, he's always wanting to take him. I says, I don't know. And I have this ratty cruiser, okay, the one that does not pull off throttle under 1,200 RPM. And I got the select gas valve. I got to make sure that the electrical tape is not leaking too bad. It leaked, but big deal. You know, it didn't pour out on the ground. And then I got to make sure I didn't have any instruments really on it. I didn't have any lights, landing lights, fuselage lights, no real lights. So I said, yeah, okay, come on, let's go. So I flew back down to Mentassa, went up Mentassa, over Manacoma Lake, and got down there, and there's these two moose next to this river. Well, I got to find a place to land. And I kind of see this strip, you know, and maybe it goes in and it goes around a corner a little bit. And I said, well, I think I can land there. I'll slamp on the right brake, ground loop it around that corner, and make a landing. So I said, Tony, you unbuckle your seatbelt and you get up right around my shoulders, because I wanted everything on the center of gravity. I didn't care if he flew out through the window when I crashed. He didn't know that though. And so I'm flying in there, and I got flaps this time, and I'm popping flaps, and I couldn't get that RPM under 100, and I needed that airspeed down. I mean, I needed it down to 32 or whatever. Whatever my very minimum. When that airplane is starting to shake, that's where I wanted it. And I wanted it shaking as soon as I could hit down. So I'm coming in, so I said, well, shit, we're too out. So I shut the airplane off, because I don't want that RPM going around pulling me a little bit of...
Because your throttle will not drop below 1,200.
So I shut the engine off, and the prop, it actually stopped windmill, and it was so slow. And I landed, and I cranked onto it, and I got around that corner, and boop, over on my nose. And it's in the mud. And there's mud up into the cowling and, you know, up into the front of the engine. But the prop didn't bend. And, well, I didn't know that right then. So here we are, sitting in this mud hole. I tell Tony, get out, we got to shoot those moose, get my rifles. Oh, and on landing, I land pretty hard. So this object comes, boom, by my ear like that. I didn't think anything of it. But when I got back, it was an axe I had in the back end of the butt, a hatchet, and it went, boom, and stuck right into the window where the window and the cowling come together. Just, boop. And that was close. We get out, we shoot these two moose. And they're nice big moose. But now, I don't think I can, first of all, then I righted the airplane, put it back on its wheels, dug all the mud, as much of the mud I could get out of the cylinders, so that I would get the best ventilation I get without overheating the cylinder. And I told Tony, I says, Tony's 400 pounds. I said, Tony, I don't think I can get off of here with you in the airplane. I think I'm going to have to go find another landing strip downriver. And okay. You know, Tony's an outdoorsman. He and I had hunted before. So I got off all right. And, you know, got off, flew, and I found this place downriver on the other side of the river. And I landed, and I knew I had to put to land on a river bar, if you want to stop in a hurry, you want your wheels right on the edge of the water and your tail wheel in the water, because it just stop you right now. It'll stop you in 25 feet, 30 feet. So I landed, and of course, Tony's walking down the river, and he see me over there strafing this landing strip. I went by it 2 or 3 times, because it went on a little sandbar, and then it went into the bushes. And so I landed, and of course, the water just go splash. He doesn't see the airplane. He just sees this water splash up. And he, oh my God, Gary's dying. There's a 400-pound man. He got away to cross the river like this. And I'm sitting there, you know, just waiting for him to get there. I'm perfectly okay. Tony thought I was dead. Okay, well, we're now on another little strip. And it's marginal with a 400-pound man in the back end. So I go up in the sandbar, and this weeds, 4 or 5 feet tall. I figured, now I got enough airspeed. I can knock those weeds over, get a little more airspeed. Then there's bushes. So I went and hung a stocking cap up on the bushes, maybe, whatever, 300 feet, 500 feet, whatever it was. Wasn't far. And so I got Tony in there again. I said, Tony, you get up and you just hug my shoulders. I want you up here on the center of gravity as far as you can get. And I put the tailwheel in the water, and I poured the car. We went up the sandbar. It was a little incline, but not much, and got in this brush, and we're gaining airspeed. And I, oh, shit, I was going to cut the power if I got to this hat because it was sitting on a kind of a little tree, and there's a lot of more trees beyond that. And so if I didn't airborne, by the time I got to that hat, I was going to cut power and just. So I got to that. I'm going down there, and by God, I'm feeling airspeed. I'm feeling the tail come up, and I hit that hat, and then I pulled flaps, and I'm going through the tree. You know how you go through brush with a prop?
Yeah.
Well, you're going through. You're flying. You're basically just right on the edge of flying. But I'm gaining airspeed, and I got off. Okay, Tony shit his britches because he's watching all this. And so we have to fly down. I had two choices. It's getting dark. Had two choices. I could fly back up Manacoma Lake, go to Mentasta, or I could fly down the Chistochina, intercept the Tok Highway, and follow the Tok Highway back to Tok, which is probably another 75 miles of flying, So I says, I said, I don't have any lights. I don't have any dash lights. I don't have any instrument lights, but I have a lighter. So I take off and says, well, we're going to go down and intercept the highway. And it's getting dark. I says, we get to the highway, cars will come down the highway, and I can follow a car light when it gets dark. And that's what we did. We'd be flying through Mentasta Pass. It's a big pass, but there's mountains everywhere. But a car would come across around the corner. Oh, there's the road. And then I would like to check my oil once in a while. I'd light my lighter, put it up to the dashboard, make sure that I got instrument gauges right. And Tony, he always wants to fly with me, right? So he's sweating BBs and he's scared.
Yeah.
So I get to Tok. There's no landing lights in Tok, none. There's just a little grass strip. And Rudy Hartzell had just built the Tok strip, but it's a dirt runway, one lane dirt runway. And I get to Tok, and I can't see that runway. It's dark. It's pitch black. But in Tok, there's a tower with a red beacon on it. And so I got to that tower, and I flew around that tower and flew around that tower, until I figured one of my buddies would get the idea that I needed light on the runway. Well, Swede finally got the picture. Another buddy of mine. He drives out there his little car, puts it at the end of the runway. Okay, Swede, I see you. So I left that tower. I had to stay at that tower because that's the only reference point I had. Tok is dark. There's no city lights there. Yeah. So I got out and I come into that runway and I right over the top of his hood, hit the runway, shut the engine down, and just coasted to a stop in the dark like this. Still on the runway. I didn't hit trees. So Swede comes up with his car. He drives his car to the taxiway. Tony, a buddy of mine, never asked me for a flight again for the next 25 years.
That's crazy.
Never asked. I cured him.
He didn't know you were crazy.
No,
how did he not know you were crazy?
I was trying to survive,
So let me ask you this. Why did you shoot those moose?
Okay. I was going to come in. We had what's called the Green Monster. It's a running rig. And I was going to go back there, have Tony get his Green Monster, and I got a picture of that rig here.
So you left them there?
I field dressed them and left them there. And that next weekend, we drove in from Mentasta, drove down to Chistochina with this rig, and retrieved these moose. Wow. Well, by the time we got there, the bears had gotten everything. But there were so many moose, we camped out on the side of the hill, and moose were coming up the river. We're up there about 100 feet. We got 6 moose that year, and we brought them all out. We got a lot of moose.
That's crazy.
That's good moose hunting area. I shouldn't say that to the camera because now somebody will say, where's Manacoma Lake? Oh, I don't hunt there anymore. So Manacoma Lake, hunt there all you want. Here.
I love it.
You want stories about not taking my wife? Fine.
Sure.
I would take her with me periodically. But every time she went with me, it seems like we'd have an incident. We're coming into the Ambler one time, and Ambler didn't have a runway at those times. We landed on a sandbar downtown. So the water in the Kobuck had to go up and down to give you a landing strip. Yeah, sometimes it's pretty short, you know. So I'm coming in there one time with her, and I'm with the cruiser, and I landed, and pow! I broke a bungee cord broke. Well, when a bungee cord broke, of course, your whole wing drops down and almost hits the ground. There's a set of 3 of them on each side. So one broke, that left that wing down like this. And I had to get the wife out and have to cut a pole, a log, at least 10 feet long, because you had to take seat out, and that bungee cord went down on a mechanism that had to be stretched down and around, clip on the other side. And there's 300 rubber bands in each one of those bungees. And you have to stretch that 6 inches. You can't do it by hand. You absolutely can do it. But you tie a rope on it, you get this log out through the door on the other side out that wing, and have them press down on that thing to stretch that bungee cord across to where it's just about ready to hook onto that thing. And then you slip it on there and cut your rope. And that's how you put a bungee on. It takes 3 or 4 times to get it on. But okay, I got a new one on there with the wife on that trip. And no problem. We spend the afternoon, go home. So another time I'm bringing her up to the Ambler. And it's short runway again. Water's high, but I know the sandbar tapers off. It doesn't just fall off.
Right.
And so I know I got a little bit of landing strip, but you know how you used to have my first cruiser had hydraulic brakes on, not hydraulic, mechanical brakes. Then we went to hydraulic. We really thought that was a big change. Even though it was still the brake shoes, it wasn't disc, it was shoes.
Oh.
They would get wet, and you know, even though you had good hydraulic pressure, and I always had a reserve can up on the firewall to feed my reservoirs in my brakes. So even if they got down, you know, from using, I had extra reservoir. And I came into Ambler again, and I came in over the trees, because you got to come in over the trees, land on the sandbar, facing the river. And of course, you know, brakes are loose, and you're not landing, but you're going to land because you've made the commitment. You're not going to take off again. I hit that river, boom. And on a PA-12, you got shuns over your hydrosorbs, over your bungees. You have shuns over the top of them.
This is like the original PA-12.
Original, yeah. So where your landing gears go into the fuselage there, you have these shuns they're just kind of protectors.
Yeah. Right.
So we hit that water, and of course it's like a scoop. The water comes in on those shuns, it goes up in the back seat. It actually goes up in the back seat. You ever got 50 gallons of water dumped on you? Yeah. And so I hit that water, bungee water coming in on the back seat. Hey, I'm in the river. I ground looped that thing. Well, I hit one rudder just as fast as I could, and I'm trying to get the tail upriver because I needed guidance to get back on the sandbar. Well, I got it upriver. I come back. I was over the wheels. So what is that? 2 feet maybe?
Yeah.
And the props going in the water like that. My wife didn't appreciate that one at all.
Yeah.
No. So the third time I take her out, she's about ready to stop flying with me. So the third time, Jess born, my boy. He was born 68, so it had to be 68. And I'm flying out to Pike's Pit to visit Pete and Lena. And I thought, well, I'll take my wife and I'll take my kid. He's in a little fur bundie, and he's about 6 months old, or, you know, not very old.
Yeah.
And I'd landed out on the ice the day before, coming down from the Kobuck to visit Pete and Lena. So I kind of had an airstrip. I had a track. And so I'm going out there. Well, it's a little cloudy, so I couldn't quite see that track, but I could see it periodically. But when I landed a little off the track, and I hit a hummock of ice and ripped off my right gear. And I go, pew, just like a wounded duck around, but it stayed on its belly. And I got the wingtip and the prop, and my hydrosorb, what had happened, they hit that thing, the hydrosorb nipple on the end of it, that's that piece that goes up into the middle of your fuselage. That's where your bungees are.
Yeah.
You know? Well, it had broken. And of course, I have safety cables on all my gears. And so it, whoop, that's that picture of that black super you see on the ice out there. Well, my wife's with me, and it's still 3/4 of a mile to Pete and Lena's, or half a mile. So I had to walk her up to Pete and Lena, knock on the door. Hey, can you take care of my wife for half a day? Of course, surely she doesn't know him from Adam, you know. But Pete and Lena, nice, and a little Eskimo couple, oh, baby, you know, and they took care of it. I walked back out on the ice to the airplane. And from there to Shoshone is all flat.
Yeah.
You know, 20 miles, just flat.
Yeah.
And so anything that's dark shows up. I'm out the airplane, I'm kind of waiting, hoping somebody will come by with us. In those days, there were snow goes yet.
Yeah.
But this dog team came over from Nelson's cabin, across the ice. He saw my airplane 5 miles over there.
Yeah.
And he goes, dog team came over, and I said, hey, can I get a ride to, it's 12 miles to town yet. Can I get a ride to town? I rode to town, got Gene Starkweather to get me a prop, and got a hydrosorb. Went back out, I had a 2x6, because I had to prop the wing up to get the gear back under there to get that little nipple in there and put a bolt in it.
Mm-hmm.
Did that, got a prop on it, hiked up to Pete and Lena's, got my wife and my little baby, and put them in the airplane. And 10 hours later, we're back in Kotzebue.
That's crazy.
Hey, that was the last time she went and rode in Kotzebue. And she never rode me in tow, because tow landings were a little tougher than being on the Arctic. You never realized.
So she really never rode with you since then?
No. I don't want to have another accident. Those are accidents. Well, not quite there. Those are major incidents there. Well, you know, sometimes you got a ground looper to stop.
Yeah.
You know, I've ground looped lots of airplanes, not to roll them over, but to stop. Your speed is down.
Dissipating energy.
Yeah, your speed. Another one is side slipping in over a tree to a short strip. So I got to where side slipping was my normal landing. Mm-hmm. You'd be coming down, you'd put that thing in a side slip and rip down like that, and then pull it out, and that's how you had to get in.
Do it with the 11 or with the 12 without flaps, right?
Yeah, you had to have a side slip. I've even done it with flaps.
Yeah,
flaps is a little more dangerous because you don't have the airlift. Once you clear out again, you're basically stopped. I mean, you're going to stop. Up in Buck Creek, we had a landing strip. We had to cut trees at the end, but still the trees were 50 feet at the end, you know, and we didn't have much of a runway. So you always had to come in, side slip in over the trees, land the airplane. And we always took off the other way. Mm-hmm. And so I think in the morning, the wind was going upriver and the evening was coming downriver. So you always timed your landing to be land one way, take off the other way. You know, hey, I got a buddy left all of his gears at the other end, coming in over the river, boom, right in the riverbank, just like my plane, except he was on solid ground, no gears, took him right out.
You know, it's kind of interesting. A lot of people I have on here are professionals, and they have a little bit of advice to give to the younger generation and stuff. And you've just done so many crazy stuff that it's like, what would you tell a younger person who's getting going and wants to go do crazy stuff like this? Because young people, like I have a few friends, they're a lot like you were.
Oh, it's
How
like,
do they keep from killing themselves?
It's like Sonnenberg, a friend of theirs, just killed himself. You're not going to be a 2,000-hour pilot with 50 hours under your belt. You got to learn to fly. You got to learn what that airplane will do with you. You know. So first of all, don't buck weather. If you have to land and wait out weather, fine. If you have to turn around, fine. If the weather's bad, that's fine. And you know, a lot of days weather's bad, and that's what gets you. But you know, then you got to build time. You know, you're no longer you're not a pilot at 200 hours. You know, you might have 200 hours, but you're just learning how to fly at 200 hours. By the time you get 1,000 hours on you, you've been through a few ground loops. You've been through a few props. You've been through a few muddy landings, you know. And every one of those you chalk up to something. like mud landings. You look pretty tough at muddy landings in the tundra. Now, muddy landings on the reef area on the mud flats, that's a different thing. Those guys, that's how they landed and how they took off. They used that muddy water as a slick runway for skis. This is in Valdez area. If you ever read Jim Reeves' autobiography, it's interesting. Because the only place he could fly was the Aleutians or the mud flats. Everything else was taken by Oscar Winchell, was taken by Mudhole Smith, was, Eielson, everybody else.
Yeah, they all had territories back.
Yeah, they all had territories.
Legally bound by
So
territory.
he ended up developing the mud flats out of Valdez, flying into the mines and the hills, flying on skis in the mud, landing in the snow and mountains. It's a real interesting story. Real interesting.
Yeah, you kind of haven't gotten to that point yet. I've sort of been working up from 1920.
It's just like Tim and them killing themselves. Tim, when we'd go into to George Lake, there's a lot of meadows along the slough and stuff, and I'd talk to Tim. We're in a boat, and I can land there, and I can land there. And okay,
Tim
you might be able to land there, but I wouldn't land there, because it's wet, reeds, grassy. Might be able to land there, might be able to stop. You land in mud, you're going to stop in a hurry, usually like this. So, and he'd tell me, I can land there, and we get up on the top of the mountains, I can land there. Yeah, I'd probably go to that strip over there, that ridge over there. And he's got 50 hours under his belt, 60 hours. And next thing he goes out and he flies on the leeward side of a mountain, and you don't do that when the wind's blowing. The wind's going to blow you right down the mountain, suck you down the mountain. You fly on the inside wind and get the lift on it. And that's exactly what happened to him. It was sheep hunting, and he put it in a steep line, and the downside wind caused him to go down and couldn't pull out of it and killed him.
Dude.
And you learn that. I can remember doing that one time over in Sasolo Lake. And I had Schultz with me and Jeff with me, and I had them all. And we're going up for this divide, and there's some sheep sitting up there in the grass area, so they wanted to look at them. Well, I don't like climbing up close to mountaintops on the leeward side because of the wind. But I said, I got horsepower, so I'm trying to get up high enough to clear that pass. And we're getting closer and closer, and we're not getting higher and higher. And and I got 4 people in the airplane. And I'll tell you what, we came over that pass at 5.6 feet. I mean, it wasn't much. Once you got to the pass, of course, your airlift starts lifting you up again. But I had full horsepower just to climb over that pass, and that was stupid on my part. I was thinking, though, that I could always peel off, because it was not a narrow pass. It was just a saddle. So till I get to the last, quarter mile, I figured I could always peel off and hit down to the valley. But that last quarter mile, I'm saying, geez, I'm still not climbing, like I want to climb. I want to be 500 feet off the ground up there. And I wasn't 50 feet,
Well, that's the thing is sometimes people learn those lessons, and sometimes
they don't live through it.
That's their last lesson.
Yeah.
And that's the scary thing when you start thinking about that, because when you talk about 1,000 hours and now you've got some time under your belt and you've screwed up and you've got some experiences, it means you kind of have to push the limits a little bit to get those experiences, but you got to do it. You got to really think through it.
You got to make sure you don't get too cocky.
Yeah.
Because when I get time and I've landed in enough spots that are hairy,
yeah,
I can land there.
Oh yeah, you just kind of
I can land there. But when Tim's telling me he can land in this mud hole with wings, I wouldn't have tried it. And I don't know how many hours I got. I quit recording hours when it got just tedious. I'd have to put down, when we land on an airstrip. Oh, yeah. I've landed on an airstrip. I've had to chase the caribou up. I got movies. Landing on an airstrip with Bob Easy in our spring, going to Kobuk. And we're landing on this strip behind a lake, and caribou everywhere. And so we're landing the airplane. I strafed it first of all because I want to scare the caribou off.
Yeah.
And strafed it. Okay, now I'm landing. Well, I didn't scare them off. So your wing is right there. You're looking out here. There's caribou right here. Oh, there's caribou over there, right there. Oh, I hope they don't run in front of me. We landed, didn't hit one, but they were close. I got
great.
movies. I had Bob take a little Super 8 movie camera. I got him movies, taking them out the window, and these caribou were like right there. And we went shot a beer there, and we were coming back, and Beezy, he's kind of a nut too. He had a Satabria. And he says, "Oh, how many duck geese you want?" There's a lot of geese on these lakes. "Oh, I don't know. Shoot me 2. I said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." He's going to go bang, bang. No, he lines up 2, boom, shot both heads right off of him. I said, "Oh, I'll let you shoot my next bear." Then we went out, we'd go out and shoot bear in the springtime because they come out in the lakes and they eat on the shoots, the green shoots coming up at the end of the lake.
Yeah.
Have a lot of fun. I quit flying because when I was 75, I got diabetes pretty bad. And I my peripheral vision is about there. Well, it used to be way back here. And when you land on a Cub, you're not landing on the front of your airplane. You're landing off your side of your airplane watching what's coming up right down here. So you're landing here. Well, I was losing that vision. And so I was finding myself, I'd be landing and I'd be pulling on full yoke and I'd have my flaps on and power and you're ready to stall out, waiting for that stall. There's a strip right here and I'd land, okay? But flare out and stall it. 10 feet high. I'd be up, boom, and boom. What the hell? I don't land like that. I usually land on the spot. So that, I kept landing and stuff, and I'd get to tight spots, and I find landing again, and I'm coming in for landing, and I'm 10 feet high and landing. I said, what the hell? Well, I was losing this vision.
Yeah.
And so I'd landed in Saldana, and I'd time my landing, and I'd come in, and no matter what I did, I was too high. I wasn't too hot. I was too high. That might be 5 feet high, 7 feet high. That's major when you're landing on a mountaintop. You don't come in high. If I want to land on that shoe, I want to land on that shoe. I don't want to land on his shoe. That's too far in. That's why that one airplane's on his nose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's
I
what
quit.
did it.
That's why I made the decision at that time, before I died, I better hang it up.
Well, thanks for coming on.
Hey, folks, I'll tell you what, this has really been a pleasure. I almost got this guy to BS a little bit. Because I know he was telling nothing but truisms, so that's myself also. I would never tell a lie nothing but truisms.
Everything we said today here was 100% true, right?
Yeah, well, there was
no.
truth in it. Yeah, I didn't say how much. There's truth in it. No.
Okay. Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
You have no idea how much we appreciate it.
it's going to be interesting to see if it turns out,
Oh, I doubt it will.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Okay.